My name is Thomas, and today I'm going to tell you about the Christmas I spent completely alone, convinced I'd been forgotten by everyone, including God, only to discover I'd never been more seen, more known, or more loved in my entire life. But before I continue, if this story touches your heart, please subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who might be spending this Christmas alone, and leave a comment below about a time when you felt abandoned but weren't. Your story matters, and someone needs to hear it. I need you to understand what my life looked like that December. I was 42 years old, recently divorced after 15 years of marriage, estranged from my 2 teenage daughters who'd chosen to live with their mother across the country, and working a job I'd taken just to pay the bills after my career as an architect fell apart during the recession. I was living in a small apartment in Minneapolis, a city where I knew almost no one. I'd moved here for what was supposed to be a fresh start, a new beginning, a chance to rebuild my life. But 3 years later, I was more isolated than I'd ever been. No close friends, no family nearby, no community, just work, home, and the empty space between them. December had arrived with its usual fanfare, Christmas decorations appearing in stores before Thanksgiving was even over, holiday music playing everywhere, people rushing around with shopping bags and excited faces, talking about their plans, their families, their traditions, and I had none of it. My daughters were spending Christmas with their mother and her new husband. My parents had passed away years ago. My siblings, a brother in Seattle and a sister in Boston, had their own families, their own lives, their own Christmas plans that didn't include flying to Minneapolis to spend time with their divorced brother, who they talked to maybe twice a year. I'd tried to make plans, really tried. I'd accepted an invitation to a co-worker's Christmas party, but standing in a room full of strangers, making small talk about families I didn't know and traditions I wasn't part of, felt worse than being alone. So I'd left early. I'd volunteered to work Christmas Day. Someone had to, and at least it would give me something to do. But my manager had insisted I take the day off, that everyone deserved Christmas with their family. Family. The word felt like a knife. The days leading up to Christmas were brutal. Everywhere I went, I was surrounded by reminders of what I didn't have. The coffee shop where I stopped each morning had a bulletin board covered in Christmas cards from regular customers. The grocery store played endless loops of songs about coming home for Christmas, about being with the ones you love, about the magic of family gatherings. Even my apartment building felt hostile. My neighbors had decorated their doors with wreaths and lights, and I could hear laughter and music through the walls as they hosted parties and gatherings. I kept my door bare, my apartment dark, pretending I wasn't home even when I was. By Christmas Eve, I'd accepted my reality. I would spend Christmas alone, completely, utterly alone, and I'd convinced myself I was fine with it, that I preferred it even. That solitude was better than forced cheerfulness, that being alone was better than feeling alone in a crowd. But I wasn't fine, not even close. Christmas Eve night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, watching the snow fall outside my window. The building was quieter than usual. Most of my neighbors had left to spend Christmas with family. The silence was so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I'd bought myself a frozen dinner and a bottle of cheap wine. This was my Christmas Eve celebration. Alone in the dark, eating reheated food, trying not to think about Christmases past when my daughters were young, when my marriage was intact, when I'd had a career and a purpose and a life that felt like it mattered. The weight of loneliness was crushing. It wasn't just that I was alone, it was that I felt fundamentally unwanted, unnecessary, like I could disappear and no one would notice or care. My ex-wife had moved on. My daughters had chosen her over me. My siblings had their own lives. My career was gone. What was I even doing here? What was the point? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through social media, a mistake I immediately regretted. My feed was full of Christmas photos, families gathered around trees, kids opening presents, couples kissing under mistletoe, friends at holiday parties. Everyone was with someone, Everyone was celebrating. Everyone was loved and wanted and part of something, except me. I closed the app and just sat there in the darkness, feeling the weight of my aloneness pressing down on me. And for the first time in years, I prayed. Not because I expected anything, not because I had faith that anyone was listening, but because I was so desperate, so empty, so completely at the end of myself, that I had nowhere else to turn. God, I said out loud to my empty apartment, my voice sounding strange and small in the silence. If you're there, if you can hear me, I need you to know something. I feel completely abandoned. By everyone, by life, and honestly, by you too. I don't feel your presence. I don't feel your love. I don't feel anything except this crushing loneliness. And I don't know what to do with it anymore. I waited. For what? I wasn't sure. A sign? A feeling? Some sense that I'd been heard? But there was nothing. Just silence. Just the snow falling outside and the empty apartment and the hollow ache in my chest that had been my constant companion for months. I thought Christmas was supposed to be about hope, I continued, surprised that I was still talking. About light in the darkness, about God coming to be with us. Emmanuel, God with us. But I don't feel you with me, God. I feel completely alone, and I don't understand why. What did I do wrong? Why am I here by myself while everyone else is with people they love? Why doesn't anyone want me? My voice broke on that last question, and I realized I was crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears of sadness, but the desperate, gasping sobs of someone who'd been holding it together for too long and had finally broken. I cried for my failed marriage, for my daughters who felt like strangers now, for the career I'd lost and the life I'd had, and the person I used to be. For the loneliness that had become so familiar, it felt like part of my identity. For the Christmas I was spending alone while the world celebrated around me. And in the midst of that crying, something shifted, not dramatically, not like a bolt of lightning or a voice from heaven, but a subtle shift, like the temperature changing by a degree or the light adjusting in a room so gradually you don't notice until you look up and realize everything looks different. I felt not alone. Not that someone was physically there. The apartment was still empty, but the quality of the emptiness had changed. It no longer felt hostile or hollow. It felt held, like the silence itself was a presence rather than an absence. Like I was being seen, even though I couldn't see who was looking. I stopped crying and just sat there, stunned by this feeling I couldn't explain or rationalize. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't peace exactly. It was more like recognition. Like someone had walked into the room and I'd turned to look and realized they'd been there all along. I just hadn't noticed. God? I said again, this time as a question rather than an accusation. And in the silence that followed, in that strange new quality of not aloneness, I felt something that would change everything about this Christmas and every day that came after. I felt known, truly, deeply, completely known. Not in a way that exposed or shamed me, but in a way that said, I see you, all of you. Your pain, your loneliness, your broken places, your questions, your anger, your desperation. I see it all, and you're not alone. I didn't hear words, there was no audible voice, but the knowing was so clear, so undeniable, that it might as well have been spoken directly into my soul. You're not alone. You were never alone. I'm here. I've been here the whole time. And this Christmas you think you're spending alone, you're actually going to discover what it really means, that I am Emmanuel, God with you. I sat there in my dark apartment on Christmas Eve, snow falling outside, the world celebrating around me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something besides despair. I felt hope, fragile, uncertain hope, but hope nonetheless. And I had no idea that this was just the beginning. I woke up on Christmas morning to silence. Complete, absolute silence. No children running down hallways excited about presents. No coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen while my wife hummed Christmas carols. No chaos, no laughter, no life. Just silence and the grey light of a Minneapolis winter morning filtering through my blinds. For a moment, I'd forgotten where I was, who I'd become, why I was alone. And then reality crashed back in, and with it, the familiar weight of isolation. Except something was different. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, and realized the silence didn't feel quite as oppressive as it had yesterday. The apartment didn't feel quite as empty. And that strange sense of presence I'd felt last night, that feeling of being seen, of being known, of not being alone, it was still there, fainter in the morning light, easier to dismiss as emotional exhaustion or wishful thinking, but still there. I got up and made coffee, going through the motions of a morning routine that felt surreal in its ordinariness. It was Christmas Day, the day families gathered, traditions were celebrated, joy was supposed to reign, and I was making instant coffee in a studio apartment alone. My phone buzzed, a text from my daughter Sarah, the older of my two girls. She was 17 now, almost an adult, though I still thought of her as the little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to draw her castles. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Hope you're having a good day." 6 words. Polite. Distant. The kind of message you send out of obligation rather than connection. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide how to respond. Should I be honest? Tell her I was spending Christmas alone in an apartment. That would make her feel guilty, and I didn't want that. Should I pretend everything was fine? That felt like lying. I settled for, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I love you. Give your sister a hug for me." Her response came quickly. "Will do. Love you too." And that was it. The sum total of my Christmas connection with my daughters. 2 brief text exchanges that felt more like checking a box than actual communication. I set the phone down and felt the loneliness trying to settle back over me like a heavy blanket. But then I remembered last night, that moment of feeling known, that sense of presence. And I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I prayed, out loud, in the middle of my apartment on Christmas morning. "God, I don't know what happened last night. I don't know if you actually spoke to me or if I was just desperate enough to imagine it. But if you're really there, if you're really here with me, I need you to show me, because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be alone on Christmas and not feel completely abandoned." I waited, not really expecting an answer. But then a thought dropped into my mind, clear and distinct from my usual mental chatter. Go outside. That was it. 2 words, not earth-shattering or profound, just go outside. I almost dismissed it. It was cold. I had nowhere to go, no one to see. What was the point? But the thought persisted, gentle but insistent. Go outside. So I did. I got dressed, jeans, sweater, winter coat, boots, and walked out of my apartment into the December morning. The cold hit me immediately, that sharp Minnesota cold that takes your breath away. Snow from yesterday's storm covered everything in fresh white, and the sky was that pale blue that only comes on the coldest days. The street was empty. No cars, no people. Everyone was inside with their families, with their traditions, with their celebrations. I started walking with no destination in mind, just putting one foot in front of the other. The snow crunched under my boots, my breath came out in white clouds, and slowly as I walked, I started to notice things, the way the morning light caught the ice on tree branches, making them sparkle like diamonds. The perfect silence of a city taking a collective breath. A cardinal perched on a snow-covered fence, its red feathers impossibly bright against the white. The intricate patterns of snowflakes caught on my coat sleeve before melting from my body heat. Beauty. Small, quiet beauty that I would have missed if I'd stayed inside, wallowing in my loneliness. I walked for blocks, past decorated houses with lights still glowing from last night, past a park where the playground equipment wore hats of snow, past a small church with a nativity scene in front, Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus frozen in their eternal tableau. I stopped at the church, looking at the nativity scene. I'd seen hundreds of them in my life, probably thousands. They were so familiar they'd become almost invisible, just another piece of Christmas decoration. But standing there in the cold morning silence, I really looked at it for the first time in years. Mary and Joseph looked young, scared, far from home, surrounded by animals in a stable because there was no room for them anywhere else. And the baby, God himself, according to the Christmas story, born in the most vulnerable, humble circumstances imaginable. Emmanuel, God with us. Not God in a palace, not God announced with fanfare and luxury, but God in a stable. God born to parents who had nowhere else to go. God arriving in poverty and obscurity, seen first by shepherds, the lowest rung of society, rather than by kings or priests or anyone important. God with the forgotten, God with the alone, God with the ones who had no room, no place, no welcome. Is that why you chose Christmas to show up for me? I said out loud, not caring if anyone heard me talking to a plastic nativity scene. Because you understand what it feels like to have no room, to be unwanted, to be on the outside. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping through my coat, my fingers going numb in my pockets. And slowly, a different way of seeing my Christmas began to emerge. I wasn't spending Christmas alone because I'd been forgotten or abandoned. I was spending Christmas alone because this was when I could finally see what had been true all along, that God had never been absent. I'd just been too distracted by what I'd lost to notice what remained. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Merry Christmas." I turned to see an older woman, probably in her 70s, bundled in a long coat and scarf, walking a small dog on a leash. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Merry Christmas," I replied automatically. "You looked like you were having quite the conversation with the nativity scene there," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I do that sometimes too, talk to them like they're real. My kids think I'm losing it, but I figure if we believe God became a baby in a manger, we can believe he still listens when we talk to him." I smiled despite myself. "Yeah, I guess I was, having a bit of an existential Christmas morning." "Aren't those the best kind?" She studied me for a moment. "You're spending Christmas alone, aren't you?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "How did you know?" "Takes one to know one. This is my third Christmas alone since my husband died. My kids are scattered across the country with their own families, and I tell them I'm fine, that I don't need them to disrupt their lives for me, which is true, but it's also lonely." "Yeah," I said, surprised by her honesty. "It really is. I'm Margaret, by the way. Thomas. Well, Thomas, I don't know what brought you to stand in the cold staring at a plastic baby Jesus, but I'm going to guess it's because you're trying to figure out if God is actually here or if Christmas is just a nice story we tell ourselves." "That's pretty accurate, actually," she smiled. "I've been where you are, many times, and here's what I've learned. God is here, really here. Not always in the ways we expect or want, but here nonetheless. Sometimes the only way we can see that is when everything else gets stripped away, when we're alone enough, quiet enough, empty enough that we finally notice the presence that's been there all along. That's what I felt last night, or thought I felt, this sense of not being alone even though I was completely alone. That's God. That's Emmanuel. God with us doesn't mean life is always full and joyful and surrounded by people. Sometimes God with us means God in the emptiness, God in the silence, God in the alone places, because that's where we need him most. We stood there together in the cold, two strangers brought together by loneliness and a plastic nativity scene, and I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening, a lightening. "Can I tell you something?" Margaret said. "Every Christmas since my husband died, I've struggled with feeling forgotten. Like the world is celebrating and I'm just here, existing, going through the motions. But this year, I'm trying something different. Instead of focusing on who's not here, I'm trying to notice who is. And I don't just mean people. I mean birds and snow and morning light and the way my dog's tail wags when she sees me. I mean God in the small moments, God in the quiet, God in the unexpected conversation with a stranger at a nativity scene. Is it working? Some days better than others. But yes, when I remember to look for it, I see it everywhere. A God showing up in ways I never would have planned or expected. Her dog started pulling on the leash, eager to continue their walk. I should go, Margaret said. But Thomas, don't spend this whole day inside that apartment feeling sorry for yourself. Keep walking, keep looking, keep noticing. God's here. You just have to have eyes to see it. She walked away, her dog trotting beside her, leaving me standing alone again at the nativity scene. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Not quite. I continued my walk, this time with different eyes, looking for what Margaret had described, God in the small moments, and I started to see it. A couple of houses down, someone had left a thermos and cups on their front porch with a sign, "Free hot cocoa for neighbors, Merry Christmas." No one was there to serve it or receive thanks, just an anonymous act of kindness for whoever might pass by. At the park, I saw a man feeding birds, scattering seed across the snow, while a dozen sparrows and finches swooped down to feast. When he saw me, he nodded and said, "Somebody's got to make sure they eat on Christmas too." Outside a fire station, firefighters were grilling burgers, and one of them called out, "Hey, you hungry? We've got plenty, come join us." I hesitated, my usual instinct to decline and avoid connection kicking in. But then I remembered, keep looking, keep noticing, keep seeing where God shows up. "Sure," I called back, "thank you." They made room for me at their makeshift Christmas gathering. 5 firefighters working the holiday shift, grilling food and swapping stories. They didn't ask why I was alone or where my family was. They just included me, made me a burger, poured me coffee from their pot, and treated me like I belonged there. We talked about everything and nothing, football, weather, funny calls they'd responded to, the best and worst Christmas gifts they'd ever received. Normal, easy conversation that I hadn't had in months. And sitting there with these strangers who'd welcomed me without question, I felt it again, that presence, that sense of being seen and known and not alone. God was here, in the kindness of firefighters, in the thermos of free cocoa, in the man feeding birds, in Margaret and her wisdom about noticing who is instead of who isn't, in the morning walk I'd only taken because of a quiet prompting I could have easily ignored. Emmanuel, God with us, God with me. When I left the fire station a couple hours later, thanking them for their unexpected hospitality, I walked back to my apartment with lighter steps. Christmas alone didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like invitation, an invitation to see God in ways I never would have noticed if I'd been distracted by the celebration I thought I was supposed to be having. I spent the rest of Christmas Day quietly, made myself a simple dinner, watched the snow fall as evening came, read by lamplight, prayed, really prayed, for the first time in years, and I wasn't alone. Not really. Not in the way that mattered most. God was there. Had been there all along. I was just finally quiet enough, empty enough, stripped down enough to notice, and that, I was beginning to realize, might be the greatest Christmas gift I'd ever received. The day after Christmas felt different than any December 26th I could remember. Usually, the day after Christmas was a letdown, the excitement over, the decorations suddenly looking tired, the return to normal life feeling anticlimactic after all the build-up. But this year, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, curious. Curious about what would happen if I kept looking for God in the small moments. Curious about what else I might notice if I stayed present instead of retreating back into isolation and self-pity. Curious about whether yesterday's experience had been a one-time gift or the beginning of something more. I made coffee and stood at my window, watching the city come back to life. People were returning to work, stores were opening, life was resuming its normal rhythm. The Christmas magic was over for most people, but for me, it felt like something was just beginning. My phone rang, an actual call, not just a text. I looked at the screen and my heart sank. It was my ex-wife, Linda. We rarely talked anymore, and when we did, it was usually about logistics involving the girls or some legal detail from the divorce that needed to be handled. I almost didn't answer. But then I remembered Margaret's words. Keep looking, keep noticing, keep seeing where God shows up. Maybe God showed up in difficult phone calls too. Hello? Thomas. Hi. I hope I'm not calling too early. No, I'm up. Is everything okay? Are the girls all right? They're fine. I'm actually calling about something else. She paused, and I could hear the awkwardness in the silence. Sarah told me you spent Christmas alone. She's been worried about you. She doesn't need to worry. I'm fine. Are you? Thomas, I know things have been hard since the divorce. I know moving to Minneapolis was difficult. And I know... She stopped, searching for words. I know I didn't make things easier. The way I handled everything, the way I turned the girls against you. I was stunned into silence. In 3 years, Linda had never acknowledged any responsibility for how our divorce had affected my relationship with our daughters. I'm not saying I was wrong to leave, she continued. The marriage wasn't working, and we both know it. But the way I handled it after, the things I said to the girls about you, the way I made it hard for you to stay connected to them, that wasn't right. And I'm sorry. Linda, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just needed to tell you. Sarah's been talking about you lately, about how she misses you, about how she feels like she doesn't really know you anymore. And I realized I played a part in that, a big part. What brought this on? Honestly, therapy. My therapist has been helping me see patterns I couldn't see on my own, ways I've been controlling and manipulative, ways I've hurt people, including you and the girls. It's been uncomfortable to face, but necessary. We talked for another 20 minutes, the longest real conversation we'd had since before the divorce. She told me about her therapy, about realizations she'd been having, about wanting to rebuild some kind of functional co-parenting relationship with me for the girls' sake. I told her about Christmas, about feeling abandoned, about the unexpected ways I'd experienced God's presence through strangers and small moments. That sounds beautiful, she said when I finished, and very different from the Thomas I knew. The Thomas I was married to would have spent Christmas working, distracting himself, pretending he was fine while being miserable inside. That Thomas was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. I know, and I didn't know how to help him. Or maybe I knew and chose not to because I was dealing with my own stuff. She sighed. We really made a mess of things, didn't we? Yeah, we did. But maybe it's not too late to clean up some of the mess. For the girls, if nothing else. After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a long time, processing what had just happened. An apology from Linda, an acknowledgement of her role in the breakdown of my relationship with my daughters, an invitation to try to rebuild something, not the marriage, but at least a functional connection for our daughters' sake. Was this God showing up? Or was it just coincidence, just Linda's therapy leading to a phone call that happened to come the day after I'd decided to start looking for God in small moments? I thought about yesterday, about Margaret saying God shows up in ways we never would have planned or expected, about the firefighters who'd welcomed a stranger to their Christmas meal, about the prompting I'd felt to go outside even though I had nowhere to go. Maybe this was part of it. Maybe God showing up didn't always look like miracles and angels singing. Maybe sometimes it looked like difficult phone calls that led to small possibilities of healing. I decided to keep the pattern from yesterday. I got dressed and went outside again, not with any particular destination in mind, just walking and being present and looking for what I might notice. The coffee shop I usually went to was open, and I stopped in for a real cup of coffee instead of the instant stuff I made at home. The barista recognized me. I'd been coming here almost daily for 3 years, but we'd never exchanged more than basic transaction pleasantries. "Merry Christmas," she said as she made my coffee. "Day late, but still. Did you have a good one?" Usually I'd just say, "Yes, you too," and move on, but I found myself being honest. Actually, I spent it alone, but it turned out better than I expected. "Yeah? How so?" So I told her. "Not everything. but the highlights. About Margaret at the nativity scene, about the firefighters, about learning to notice God in small moments instead of focusing on who wasn't there. She listened while making drinks for other customers, and when I finished, she smiled. That's beautiful. I spent Christmas alone too, actually. My family's overseas, and I couldn't afford the flight home this year. I was pretty bummed about it, but then a regular customer invited me to her family's dinner. Complete stranger, really. But she'd noticed I always worked holidays and asked if I had somewhere to go. That dinner was amazing. Her family accepted me like I'd always been part of it. Did you go? Almost didn't. Felt weird, you know, going to a stranger's house for Christmas. But I'm so glad I did. Sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born into. It's the one God puts in your path when you need them most. She handed me my coffee and waved away my payment. This one's on me. Merry Christmas, Thomas, and thanks for sharing your story. I needed to hear it. I left the coffee shop feeling that same lightness I'd felt yesterday. Connection, real human connection with someone I'd been walking past for 3 years without really seeing. And again, that sense of presence, of God being in these small moments of honesty and recognition. I kept walking, and my feet took me toward a part of the city I'd never explored before. I ended up in front of a community center with a sign announcing various programs and activities, and on the door was a flyer. New Year, New Connections, community dinner every Friday night. All are welcome, no charge. Come as you are. Friday night, tomorrow, a weekly community dinner where all were welcome. I stood there looking at the flyer, feeling that same gentle prompting I'd felt yesterday when the thought "go outside" had dropped into my mind. Go tomorrow. Be there. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the flyer, then continued my walk. As I walked, I started noticing other things I'd been blind to. A little free library on someone's lawn, full of books for anyone to take. A community garden, dormant now in winter, but with a sign inviting neighbors to sign up for spring plots, a bulletin board outside a church covered in notices for support groups, volunteer opportunities, community events. All these invitations to connection had been here all along. I'd just been too isolated in my own misery to see them. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my brother in Seattle. We hadn't talked since Thanksgiving, when our conversation had been brief and surface level, but tonight I wanted to try something different. Thomas? Hey, this is a surprise. Everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. I just wanted to talk. Actually talk, not just the usual check-in about how we're both fine. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Jake recalibrating. Okay, what's on your mind? I spent Christmas alone this year. Oh man, I'm sorry. I didn't think about, we just assumed you had plans or... It's okay. I'm not calling to make you feel guilty. Actually, something interesting happened. Being alone forced me to, look at things differently. To notice God in places I wasn't expecting. I told him about the past 2 days. About Margaret and the firefighters and Linda's phone call and the barista at the coffee shop. About learning to look for who is present instead of who isn't. Jake was quiet for a long moment after I finished. That's really profound, Thomas, and honestly kind of convicting. I've been so focused on my own life, work, kids, Jenny's health issues, that I completely dropped the ball on staying connected with you. That's not okay. We both did it, drifted apart. Let geography become an excuse for not staying close. Yeah, but you were going through a divorce and dealing with a lot, and I just checked out, sent the occasional text and called it being a good brother. He sighed. Can I tell you something? Jenny's been on me about this, about how I've basically abandoned you when you needed family most. She wanted me to invite you out for Christmas, but I talked myself out of it, convinced myself you were probably fine, that you wouldn't want to come anyway. Would you have really wanted me there? Or would it have felt like an obligation? Honestly, at first, it would have felt like an obligation, but that's exactly the problem Jenny was trying to get me to see. We don't just love people when it's convenient. We love people when it's hard too, and I haven't been doing that with you. We talked for over an hour, really talked, the way we used to when we were younger, before life and distance and busyness got in the way. He told me about his marriage, about struggles with their teenage son, about work stress that was affecting his health. I told him about the loneliness, about losing my career, about feeling like I'd failed at everything that mattered. "You haven't failed," Jake said. "You're rebuilding. That's different." "It doesn't feel different." "I know. But maybe that's part of what God was showing you this Christmas, that rebuilding doesn't happen in big dramatic moments. It happens in small ones, in daily choices to get up and keep going, in noticing beauty and connection in places you weren't looking before." After we hung up, I sat with the conversation, feeling something I hadn't felt in years regarding my brother. Hope. Hope that we could rebuild our relationship, that we could be actual brothers again, instead of just people who shared DNA and childhood memories. That night before bed, I started a journal. I'd never been a journal person, but something about the past 2 days made me want to capture it, to remember, to keep track of where I was seeing God show up. I wrote, "Day 1, Christmas Eve, felt completely alone and abandoned, prayed desperately, felt a presence, God saying I'm not alone, felt seen and known in a way I can't fully explain. Day 2, Christmas, prompting to go outside, met Margaret at nativity scene, free cocoa, man feeding birds, firefighters who invited me to eat with them, learned to look for who is present instead of who isn't. Day 3, Deck 26, Linda called and apologized. Real conversation with barista, found community dinner flyer, called Jake, real conversation, not surface level. Rebuilding feels possible. I read what I'd written and felt gratitude welling up. 3 days ago, I'd been convinced I was completely alone, that no one cared, that God had abandoned me, along with everyone else. But in 3 days, I'd experienced more genuine connection, more honest conversation, more sense of God's presence than I had in the past 3 years. Not because anything external had changed dramatically, but because I was finally paying attention, finally looking, finally willing to see what had been there all along. Emmanuel, God with us, God with me, not in the ways I'd expected, not in the Christmas I'd thought I wanted, surrounded by family, celebrating traditions, feeling included and valued, but in a quieter, deeper way, in the aloneness that wasn't actually aloneness, in the strangers who became connections, in the difficult conversations that opened doors, in the small moments I would have missed if I'd stayed inside feeling sorry for myself. I closed the journal and looked out my window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Margaret was probably doing the same thing I was, noticing, looking, seeing where God showed up in her day. The barista was maybe telling someone else about the stranger who shared his story. The firefighters were responding to calls, being God's presence for people having the worst days of their lives. And tomorrow, I'd go to that community dinner. I'd keep walking, keep noticing, keep looking for the presence that had been there all along, just waiting for me to finally have eyes to see it. This was my Christmas miracle. Not a dramatic rescue from loneliness, but an invitation into a different way of seeing. A way of seeing that made loneliness impossible because God was everywhere, in everyone, in every small moment of connection and beauty and unexpected grace. And I was just beginning to learn how to see it. Friday arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. All day at work, I was a draftsman now at a small engineering firm, a far cry from my days as a lead architect, but it paid the bills. I kept thinking about the community dinner that evening. Part of me wanted to back out, to go home to my apartment where it was safe and predictable and I didn't have to risk anything. But another part of me, the part that was learning to recognize God's gentle promptings, knew I needed to go. The community center was a 10-minute walk from my apartment. I'd passed it hundreds of times in 3 years and never once gone inside. As I approached that evening, I could see lights glowing warmly through the windows, and I could hear voices and laughter from inside. I stood outside for a moment, my old friend anxiety trying to convince me this was a mistake. What if no one talked to me? What if I felt even more alone in a room full of people than I did in my apartment? What if they asked questions I didn't want to answer? But then I remembered something Margaret had said. God, in the unexpected conversation with a stranger at a nativity scene. I was a stranger. Maybe I was also the unexpected conversation someone else needed. I pushed open the door. The space was warm and welcoming. Tables arranged in a large circle, people of all ages moving around, some setting out food, others arranging chairs, everyone seeming to know each other. For a moment, no one noticed me, and I almost turned around and left. Then a woman about my age, with grey streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail and a warm smile, spotted me. "Hi, welcome. Is this your first time joining us?" "Yeah. I saw the flyer and thought I'd check it out." "Well, we're so glad you're here. I'm Rachel, one of the coordinators. What's your name?" "Thomas." "Thomas, welcome. We're just finishing setup, but make yourself at home. Grab a drink from that table over there. Find a seat anywhere. We don't assign seats or anything formal like that. Dinner will be ready in about 10 minutes. She moved on to greet someone else, and I stood there feeling awkward and out of place. But I'd come this far. I grabbed a glass of water and found a seat at one of the tables, trying to look like I belonged there, even though I felt like an imposter. An older man sat down next to me. He had the weathered face of someone who'd lived a hard life, but his eyes were kind. "First timer?" he asked. "That obvious? You've got the look. Same look I had my first time 6 months ago, like you're not sure you belong here, not sure what you're getting yourself into." "Yeah, that's pretty accurate." "What made you come back?" "The food's decent," he said with a grin, "but really it's the people. I spent 40 years working construction, then got injured and couldn't work anymore, lost my apartment, lived in my truck for a while, then in a shelter, started coming here because I needed a meal, but kept coming because I needed the community more than the food." "Are you still in the shelter?" "Nah, got a room in a boarding house now. It's not much, but it's mine. And I got here partially because of connections I made at these dinners. Someone knew someone who had a room to rent. Another person helped me apply for disability. Another person gave me furniture they didn't need. Community works when we let it." More people were filling in the tables now, families with young children, elderly folks who came in pairs or alone, young adults who looked like they might be college students, people in business clothes who'd come straight from work, people who looked like they were struggling financially, a real cross-section of humanity, all gathering around tables to share a meal. Rachel stood up to get everyone's attention. "Okay, folks, welcome. For those who are new tonight, and I see several new faces, which is wonderful, we do things pretty simply here. We eat family-style, passing dishes and serving each other. We don't ask anyone to pray out loud, unless they want to, but we do take a moment of silence before eating for anyone who wants to offer their own private thanks or reflection. And we have one rule: no one eats alone. If you see someone sitting by themselves, pull up a chair. We're all family here, whether we just met or have been coming for years." The moment of silence was brief, but I found myself praying for real. "Thank you, God, for leading me here. Help me be open to whatever you want to teach me tonight." Then the food started moving around the tables. Simple, hearty fare, roasted chicken, vegetables, salad, bread. Nothing fancy, but made with care. As we ate, conversations bloomed around the tables. The man next to me, whose name I learned was Joe, introduced me to others at our table. A young mother named Lisa, with 2 small children. An elderly woman named Dorothy, who'd been widowed 5 years ago. A couple in their 30s, Miguel and Anna, who were new to the city and looking for community. "So, what brings you here, Thomas?" Lisa asked. I could have given a surface answer. Could have said I was new to the area, looking to meet people. Whatever generic response would keep things light. But something about this space, these people, made me want to be honest. "I spent Christmas alone this year," I said, "completely alone. And it forced me to face some things about my life, how isolated I'd become, how I'd been defining myself by what I'd lost instead of what I still had." And I started looking for God in small moments, in unexpected places. The flyer for this dinner felt like one of those moments. I expected awkwardness or pity, but instead several people around the table nodded with recognition. "I spent last Christmas alone too," Dorothy said. "First one after my husband died. Thought I was going to drown in grief, but then a neighbor invited me to her family's dinner, and it saved me. Made me realize I could choose to be part of community even when my own family was gone." "I spent 3 Christmases in a shelter before I came here," Joe added. "Thought I was invisible. Thought no one cared, but people at these dinners saw me, really saw me. Not as a homeless guy or a charity case, but as a person. That changed everything." Miguel spoke up, his accent revealing English wasn't his first language. "Anna and I came to this country 2 years ago, left our families, our home, everything we knew. Our first Christmas here, we felt so alone. But we found this place, and now," he gestured around the room, "now we have family again. Different family, but still family." The conversation continued, each person sharing pieces of their story. Not all of it was about loneliness or struggle. There was laughter too, stories of small victories and unexpected joys. But what struck me was the honesty. No one was pretending their life was perfect. No one was putting on a performance. We were just people, broken and whole at the same time, sharing food and stories and presents. After dinner, people naturally migrated to different areas of the room. Some helped with cleanup. Others sat in clusters having deeper conversations. A few kids were playing in a corner under their parents' watchful eyes. Rachel found me as I was helping clear plates. "So, what did you think? Will we see you again?" "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "Definitely. I'm glad. Can I share something with you? I started these dinners 5 years ago after my husband left me. I was devastated, angry, isolated, thought my life was over, and one day I was praying. More like yelling at God, honestly, and I felt this clear instruction: feed people. Not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually too. Create a space where people can be real with each other. That's what this is," I said, "a space where people can be real. That's the goal. We're not trying to fix anyone or save anyone. We're just trying to be present with each other, to see each other, to remind each other that we're not alone even when we feel like we are." That's what I needed to hear, what I needed to experience. She smiled. "God's funny that way. He puts us exactly where we need to be, often without us realizing it until we get there." I stayed for another hour, helping clean up and talking to people. Ana gave me her phone number and invited me to a Spanish conversation group she and Miguel ran for people wanting to learn the language. Dorothy mentioned a book club at the local library that met monthly. Joe told me about a community garden project starting in the spring. Connection points, invitations, doorways into community I'd been blind to for 3 years. When I finally left and walked home through the cold night, I felt full in a way that had nothing to do with the food I'd eaten. I'd spent an evening with strangers and felt more seen, more known, more connected than I had in years. Back in my apartment, I added to my journal, Day 6, community dinner. Met Joe, Lisa, Dorothy, Miguel, Anna, Rachel. Everyone had stories of loneliness and finding community. Realized I'm not the only one rebuilding. Got invitations to conversation group, book club, garden project. God shows up in shared meals and honest conversation. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up to a text from my daughter Sarah. Not the obligatory message like on Christmas, but something more substantial. "Dad, I've been thinking about you a lot. Mum told me she called you and that you guys had a good talk. I'm sorry we've been so distant. I miss you. Can we FaceTime tomorrow, like actually talk, not just quick updates?" I read the message 3 times, feeling emotions I wasn't sure how to name. Hope, nervousness, gratitude, fear of getting hurt again. I texted back, "I'd love that. I miss you too. What time works for you?" Her response came quickly. 2 p.m. Sophie wants to talk too. Sophie was my younger daughter, 15, and even more withdrawn from me than Sarah. "Perfect. I'll call at 2. I spent Saturday in a strange state of anticipation, both eager for and nervous about the call with my daughters. To distract myself, I went back to the coffee shop. The same barista, whose name I'd learned was Keisha, greeted me with a warm smile. "How's your week been? Still noticing God in small moments?" "Yeah, actually. Went to a community dinner last night. Met some amazing people. And I'm talking to my daughters tomorrow. Really talking, not just surface stuff." "That's wonderful. See? You told me your Christmas story, which encouraged me, and now you're building connections and rebuilding relationships. That's how God works. One small thing leads to another, and before you know it, your whole life has shifted." "It doesn't feel small anymore," I admitted. "It feels like everything is changing." "Because it is. But it started small. That's what people don't understand about transformation. We're always looking for the big, dramatic moment, but real change happens in tiny increments. In the decision to go outside instead of staying isolated. In the choice to go to a community dinner even when you're scared. In the willingness to have honest conversations instead of surface ones. I spent the rest of the day walking around the city with new eyes. Every person I passed, I found myself wondering, what's their story? Are they lonely? Are they struggling? Are they looking for God in small moments like I am? I noticed a man sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. The old me would have walked past without a second thought, but I stopped. "They're pretty bold, aren't they?" I said, gesturing to the birds swarming around his feet. He looked up with a smile. "They know who has the food. Animals are smarter than we give them credit for." "Adi!" He pulled out another handful of seed and scattered it. "I come here every Saturday. Rain, snow, doesn't matter. These birds depend on me, and I depend on them." "Depend on them?" "For purpose, for routine, for the reminder that I matter to something, even if it's just pigeons." He looked at me more directly. "Lost my wife 2 years ago. Retired, kids all grown and busy with their own lives. It's easy to feel unnecessary, but these birds need me. That helps." We talked for 20 minutes. His name was Harold, and he'd been a teacher for 40 years. He told me about his wife, about grief, about learning to build a new life after loss. And I told him about my Christmas, about learning to see God in unexpected places, about the community dinner. "That's good," he said, "that you're building connections. That's what saves us when we're drowning. Other people, community, the reminder that we're not alone." When I got home that evening, I realized something profound. A week ago, I would have walked past Harold without seeing him, would have been so locked in my own loneliness that I'd have been blind to his. But now I was seeing people, really seeing them, and in seeing them, in connecting with them, I was being seen too. Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m., I FaceTimed with my daughters. When their faces appeared on my screen, I felt my throat tighten with emotion I hadn't expected. They looked older. Sarah had cut her hair short. Sophie was wearing makeup. They were becoming young women, and I'd been missing it. "Hi, Dad," Sarah said, and I could hear nervousness in her voice matching my own. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hi, Sophie. It's so good to see you both." For a moment, there was awkward silence. Then Sophie, surprisingly, spoke first. "Mom said you spent Christmas alone. Is that true?" "It is. That sucks. I'm sorry. Actually, it ended up being one of the most important Christmases of my life." I told them the story. About feeling abandoned, about praying desperately on Christmas Eve, about the sense of God's presence, about Margaret and the firefighters and the community dinner and meeting Harold yesterday. I was honest about the loneliness, about the pain, but also about the unexpected beauty I'd found in it. They listened without interrupting, and when I finished, Sarah had tears in her eyes. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were struggling so much. I thought you were fine, that you'd moved on, that you didn't really miss us. I miss you every single day. But I didn't know how to tell you that without making you feel guilty or making things harder." "We miss you too," Sophie said quietly. But it felt weird to say so, like we were betraying Mom or something. We talked for over an hour. Really talked. They told me about school, about friends, about struggles they were having that they'd never mentioned in our brief text exchanges. I told them about my job, about rebuilding my life, about learning to see God in small moments. We laughed, we cried, we had the kind of honest conversation I'd been afraid we might never have again. When we hung up, we'd made plans to talk every Sunday, and tentative plans for them to visit during spring break if their mother agreed. I sat there after the call ended, staring at my phone, feeling like I'd just been given a gift I didn't deserve but desperately needed, my daughters. A chance to rebuild our relationship, permission to be honest about struggling instead of pretending to be fine. That evening I wrote in my journal, Day 8, talked to my daughters, real conversation. They miss me, they want to stay connected. Spring break visit might happen. Met Harold, who feeds pigeons to feel needed. Keisha said transformation happens in tiny increments. She's right. My life is changing, one small moment at a time. I looked back over the entries from the past week. 8 days since Christmas Eve, when I'd felt completely abandoned. 8 days of noticing, of looking, of seeing where God showed up. 8 days of tiny increments that had somehow added up to something significant. I wasn't lonely anymore. Not in the crushing, desperate way I'd been before. I still lived alone. I still had hard days. But I'd discovered something that changed everything. I'd learned to see God in strangers who became friends. In difficult conversations that opened doors, in community dinners and baristas and men feeding pigeons, in daughters who wanted to reconnect, in tiny moments that added up to transformation. Emmanuel, God with us, God with me, not just at Christmas, but every day, in every small moment, in every unexpected connection, in every choice to reach out instead of isolate, to show up instead of hide, to look for presence instead of focusing on absence. This was my Christmas miracle. Not a rescue from being alone, but an invitation to see that I'd never been alone in the first place. And it was only the beginning. The second week of January arrived with bitter cold and a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. My life was beginning to take on a shape I wouldn't have recognized a month ago. Weekly community dinners, daily coffee shop conversations with Keisha, Sunday FaceTime calls with my daughters, journal entries tracking where I saw God showing up in small moments. But on Tuesday evening, I hit my first real obstacle. I was at the coffee shop, sitting in my usual corner seat with a book, when a couple sat down at the table next to mine. They were younger than me, maybe early 30s, and they were clearly having the kind of conversation people have when they're trying to figure out if their relationship is going to survive. I just feel like we're roommates, the woman said, her voice tight with frustration. We live together, we pay bills together, but we don't connect anymore. When's the last time we had a real conversation? We're talking right now, the man replied defensively. We're fighting right now. That's not the same thing. I tried not to listen, tried to focus on my book, but their voices carried in the quiet coffee shop, and their words hit too close to home. That could have been Linda and me 5 years ago, having the exact same conversation, both of us too hurt and too proud to admit we'd lost each other somewhere along the way. The woman started crying, and the man looked helpless, reaching across the table but not quite touching her, like he didn't know if comfort would be welcome. They eventually left, the tension between them palpable, and I sat there feeling the weight of memory pressing down on me. That night I couldn't sleep. The couple's conversation had opened something I'd been trying to keep closed, the grief over my failed marriage. Not grief over Linda specifically. I'd accepted that we weren't right for each other. But grief over the death of what we'd tried to build together. Grief over the family we'd been and would never be again. Grief over my daughters growing up in a divided home. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and sat at my kitchen table with my journal. But instead of writing about where I'd seen God, I found myself writing a letter I would never send. Linda, I know we're trying to rebuild a functional co-parenting relationship, and I'm grateful for that. But there are things I never said during our divorce that I need to get out, even if only on this paper you'll never see. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I worked so much that I was never really home. I'm sorry I was more committed to my career than to our marriage. I'm sorry I didn't notice how lonely you were until you'd already decided to leave. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to save us, but I'm also angry. Angry that you made it so hard for me to stay connected with our daughters. Angry that you moved across the country and took them with you. Angry that you let them think the divorce was entirely my fault when we both know it takes two people to kill a marriage. Mostly, though, I'm just sad. Sad that we failed. Sad that our daughters have to live with the consequences of our failure. Sad that we let something that started with so much love end with so much bitterness. I don't want you back. I want you to be happy, but I want to stop carrying the weight of this grief and anger alone. I wrote for an hour, pouring out everything I'd been holding in for 3 years. When I finally stopped, my hand was cramping and my face was wet with tears. I hadn't realized I was crying. And then, in the silence of my apartment at 3 a.m., I felt it again, that presence, that sense of not being alone, even though I was completely alone. I'm here. I've been here through all of it, the marriage, the divorce, the grief, the rebuilding. You're not carrying this alone. But it feels like I am, I said out loud. It feels like I'm carrying so much weight, and I don't know how to set it down. Bring it to me, all of it, the grief, the anger, the sadness, the regret. I can carry what you can't carry. How? How do I do that? Stop trying to process it alone. Talk to someone, a therapist, a pastor, someone who can help you work through what you've been avoiding. I sat with that for a long time. Therapy. I'd resisted it during the divorce, convinced I could handle everything on my own, but here I was, 3 years later, still carrying grief and anger that was clearly not handled. The next morning, exhausted from lack of sleep, I did something I should have done years ago. I looked up therapists in my area who specialized in divorce recovery and grief. I found one, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, whose profile mentioned faith-based counseling for people working through loss and rebuilding. I called and left a message before I could talk myself out of it. She called back that afternoon. "Thomas, this is Dr. Mitchell returning your call. I have an opening Thursday evening if that works for you. Can you tell me briefly what brings you to therapy? I'm 3 years out from a divorce that I thought I'd dealt with, but I'm realizing I haven't actually processed any of it. I've just been surviving, and I'm tired of just surviving." That's very insightful and very honest. I think we can work with that. Thursday at 6 p.m.? I'll be there. When I hung up, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved that I'd finally taken a step I'd been avoiding. Terrified of what I might have to face in therapy, what wounds I might have to open in order to heal them. That evening at the community dinner, I was quieter than usual. Rachel noticed. "You okay?" she asked as we were cleaning up after the meal. "Just processing some stuff. Had a rough night last night. Want to talk about it?" So I told her. About the couple in the coffee shop, about the memories it triggered, about writing the letter to Linda at 3 a.m., about calling a therapist. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she smiled. "That's huge, Thomas. That's really brave. It's easier to keep avoiding painful things than to face them head-on. I'm terrified of what I'm going to find when I start digging into all of it. That's normal. But you know what I've learned? The things we're most afraid to face are usually the things we most need to heal from. And you're not doing it alone. You have this community now. You have whatever relationship with God you're building. You have support." "When did you work through your divorce stuff? Through therapy?" "Yeah, about a year after my husband left. I was so angry, so bitter, so convinced I'd never be okay again. But therapy helped me see patterns I couldn't see on my own. Helped me grieve what was lost without staying stuck in the loss. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." "How long did it take?" "For me, about 6 months of weekly sessions before I started to feel like I could breathe again. Another 6 months before I could think about my ex without feeling that crushing anger. Everyone's different, though. Some people need more time, some less. The point is to do the work, however long it takes." Joe joined us in the kitchen. "We talking about therapy? Because I'm a huge fan. Best thing I ever did was start seeing someone after I lost my housing. Help me deal with the shame and the trauma and all the crap I'd been carrying around. Did your therapist work with your faith stuff too? I asked. I found one who does faith-based counseling, but I'm not sure what that even means. Mine did. For me, it meant she helped me work through the anger I had at God for letting my life fall apart. Helped me separate what was God's responsibility and what was mine. Helped me see that God hadn't abandoned me even when it felt like He had. Dorothy had been listening from nearby. I did grief counseling after my husband died. Church-based, led by a pastor who'd also lost his spouse. It saved my life, honestly, gave me permission to grieve fully instead of pretending to be strong for everyone else. I looked around the kitchen at these people who'd become my friends, who were being so honest about their own journeys through therapy and healing, and I felt less alone in taking this step. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. Dr. Mitchell's office was in a converted house similar to the community center, warm and welcoming rather than clinical and cold. She was probably in her 50s, with an easy smile and eyes that suggested she'd seen a lot, but wasn't shocked by anything. "Thomas, come in. Make yourself comfortable." I sat in a chair across from her, suddenly aware of how tense I was, how my hands were gripping the armrests like I was about to be launched into space. "First session is always the hardest," she said gently. "You don't know me, I don't know you, and you're not sure what you're supposed to say or do, so let me make it easy. Tell me your story. Start wherever feels right." So I told her. About the marriage, the divorce, losing my career and my daughters, and my sense of who I was. About 3 years of isolation and survival, about Christmas alone, and the unexpected experience of God's presence. About the past 2 weeks of learning to see God in small moments and building community and reconnecting with my daughters. "That's quite a journey," she said when I finished. "And it sounds like you've made remarkable progress in the past 2 weeks. But you called me because you realized there's deeper work that needs to be done. What specifically are you hoping to work on?" "I want to stop carrying grief and anger that I thought I'd dealt with but clearly haven't. I want to process the divorce for real instead of just surviving it. I want to rebuild my life on something solid instead of just putting band-aids on wounds that haven't healed." "That's good. Clear goals. And you mentioned you wanted faith-based counseling. Can you tell me more about what that means to you?" I thought about it. I guess I want help understanding where God is in all of this. Not in a simplistic, everything happens for a reason way, but in a real way. I want to understand how to grieve and heal and rebuild without losing this connection with God I'm just starting to discover. I can work with that. Here's how I approach faith-based counseling. I don't separate the psychological from the spiritual. I believe we're integrated beings, mind, body, and spirit all connected. So we'll work on the psychological aspects of your grief and anger, but we'll also explore how your faith informs that work and how that work deepens your faith. We spent the next 45 minutes beginning to map out the landscape of my grief. She asked questions that made me think, that made me see patterns I hadn't noticed, that made me realize how much I'd been avoiding. "I'm going to give you homework," she said, as our session was ending. "I want you to write a letter to yourself 3 years ago, right after the divorce. What would you tell that version of Thomas? What does he need to hear?" That's going to be hard. Good homework usually is, but I think it will help you see how far you've come and what you're still carrying from that time. When I left her office, I felt wrung out, but somehow lighter. Like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years and was finally starting to exhale. That weekend, I worked on the assignment. It took me several attempts to get it right. "Dear Thomas, 3 years ago, I know you're drowning right now. I know the divorce feels like the end of everything. I know losing daily connection with your daughters feels unbearable. I know watching your career crumble feels like losing your identity. I know you're so angry and hurt and scared that you can barely function. I want to tell you it's going to be okay, but you won't believe me, so I'll tell you something else instead. It's going to be hard. Really, really hard. You're going to spend 3 years feeling lost and alone and like you failed at everything that mattered. But you're going to survive, more than survive. You're going to slowly, painfully learn how to live again. You're going to discover that God didn't abandon you. You just couldn't see him through your pain. You're going to learn that community and connection are possible even when you feel fundamentally unlovable. You're going to rebuild a relationship with your daughters, even though it seems impossible right now. The anger you're carrying, it's valid. The grief, it's real. The sense of failure, it's understandable. But don't let those things define you. Don't let them become your identity. You're more than your worst moments. You're more than your mistakes. You're more than what you've lost. 3 years from now, you're going to spend Christmas alone, and it's going to crack you open in ways that need to happen. You're going to cry on Christmas Eve and pray desperately and feel God's presence for the first time in years. And that's going to start something. A slow unwinding of all the isolation you've wrapped yourself in. A gradual opening to connection and community and healing. So hold on. Do whatever you need to do to survive these next 3 years. And know that on the other side of surviving is learning to actually live again. You're going to be okay. Not the same. Not unmarked by what happened, but okay. Maybe even better than okay. Hang on, Thomas, 3 years later. Reading what I'd written, I felt tears streaming down my face. Tears for the Thomas I'd been 3 years ago, so broken and lost. Tears for the journey it had taken to get from there to here. Tears of gratitude that I'd survived and was finally starting to heal. Sunday afternoon, during my FaceTime call with my daughters, Sarah surprised me with a question. "Dad, Mom said you started therapy. Is that true?" "Yeah, I had my first session Thursday." "That's really cool. I'm proud of you." "You are?" "Yeah. It takes guts to admit you need help. And honestly, I've been thinking about it too. About therapy. I've got some stuff I need to work through about the divorce and how it affected me. I think that would be good for you. Really good." Sophie spoke up. "Can I ask you something? Are you going to therapy to try to get over Mom? Like, to move on or whatever?" "No, sweetie. I'm going to therapy to work through the grief and anger I've been carrying so I can be a better person and a better dad. Your mom and I weren't right for each other, and that's okay, but the way the divorce happened left wounds that I haven't dealt with properly. I want to heal those wounds so they don't keep affecting my life and my relationship with you two." "That makes sense," Sarah said. "I think we all have wounds from it. Maybe we should all be in therapy." We talked more about therapy. About healing, about how hard it is to work through painful things, but how necessary it is. And I realized this was another gift, being able to model for my daughters what it looks like to do the hard work of healing instead of just pretending to be fine. That evening, I updated my journal. Day 15. Couple in coffee shop triggered grief about divorce. Wrote letter to Linda, not sending. Called therapist, first session done. Community dinner people shared their therapy experiences. Homework. Letter to myself 3 years ago. Sarah thinking about therapy too. Learning that healing isn't optional. It's necessary. I looked back over the past 2 weeks of entries. So much had changed since Christmas Eve. I'd gone from complete isolation to having community. From estrangement from my daughters to rebuilding connection. From surviving to beginning to heal. But I was also starting to understand something important. The Christmas miracle hadn't been about God rescuing me from loneliness. It had been about God giving me eyes to see where he'd been all along, to see opportunities for connection I'd been blind to see that healing was possible if I was willing to do the work. Emmanuel. God with us. Not God fixing everything magically, but God being present in the hard work of recovery and rebuilding, God in therapy sessions and community dinners and honest conversations with daughters, God in the slow, patient process of healing wounds I'd been ignoring for years. I closed my journal and sat in the quiet of my apartment. It was just after 9 p.m. on a Sunday evening in January. Cold outside, warm inside. Alone in my apartment but not lonely, carrying grief but not crushed by it, facing hard work ahead but not facing it alone. This was what it meant that God hadn't abandoned me. Not that my life was suddenly perfect or pain-free, but that I wasn't walking through the hard things alone anymore, that I had support, divine and human, for the journey of healing, and that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 3 weeks had passed since Christmas, and I was settling into a rhythm I couldn't have imagined a month ago. Weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Mitchell, where we were slowly unpacking 3 years of unprocessed grief. Friday community dinners, where I'd gone from being the awkward newcomer to being part of the core group that helped set up and clean up. Sunday FaceTime calls with my daughters that were becoming deeper and more honest each week. Daily journal entries tracking where I saw God showing up. But I was also starting to notice something unexpected. As I healed, I was becoming aware of how broken the people around me were. Not in a judgmental way, but with a kind of compassionate recognition. I could see the loneliness in the grocery store clerk who lingered too long in conversation, the grief in the elderly man who walked past my apartment every evening at the same time, shoulders hunched against more than just the cold, the desperation in the woman at the coffee shop who sat alone every morning, staring at her laptop but never typing. It was like my own brokenness had given me eyes to see other people's brokenness. And with that seeing came a question I kept bringing to therapy. What am I supposed to do with what I'm seeing? What do you want to do with it? Dr. Mitchell asked during our Thursday session. I don't know. Help somehow? But I'm barely keeping my own head above water. I'm still in therapy working through my own stuff. Who am I to help anyone else? That's actually a false dichotomy, she said. The idea that you have to be completely healed before you can help others heal. Often, the people who help us most are the ones who are a few steps ahead on the same path we're walking, not the ones who finish the journey entirely. So, you think I should do something with what I'm seeing? I think you should pay attention to what you're being drawn to, not in a compulsive, I have to fix everyone way, but in a curious, I wonder what God is inviting me into way. What keeps coming up for you? What patterns do you notice in the people who catch your attention? I thought about it. Loneliness. I keep noticing lonely people. People who are isolated like I was. People who look like they're going through the motions, but not actually living. And how does noticing them make you feel? Sad. But also like I understand them in a way I couldn't have before Christmas. Like I know what it feels like to be where they are. That's empathy. That's you developing compassion, born from your own suffering. And empathy is powerful, Thomas. It's what allows us to truly see each other, to truly connect. The question is, what do you want to do with that empathy? I sat with that question for the rest of the session and into the next day. What did I want to do with this growing awareness of other people's loneliness? Friday evening at the community dinner, I mentioned it to Rachel as we were setting up tables. I've been noticing lonely people everywhere, I said, and I keep wondering if I'm supposed to do something about it. Like what? I don't know, that's the problem. I just see them, and I feel this pull to, I don't know, reach out somehow. But that feels presumptuous, like who am I to assume they want or need my help? Rachel smiled. You know what I think? I think you're being prepared for something. God doesn't give us eyes to see suffering without also giving us the means to respond to it. Maybe you're not supposed to have a grand plan. Maybe you're just supposed to respond when opportunities present themselves. That evening during dinner, I sat next to a woman I hadn't seen before. She was probably in her late 50s, well-dressed and sitting ramrod straight, like she was forcing herself to be there. First time? I asked gently. She looked startled, like she'd hoped to remain invisible. Yes, I wasn't sure I should come. I don't usually do things like this. I felt the same way my first time. I'm Thomas. Catherine. She hesitated, then added, I'm recently widowed. My husband died 4 months ago. People keep telling me I need to get out, make connections, join groups, but everything feels wrong, like I'm betraying his memory by trying to move forward. I recognized that pain, not from widowhood, but from the similar grief of losing the life you thought you'd have. I lost my marriage 3 years ago, I said. Different kind of loss, but similar feelings. Like moving forward meant admitting it was really over. Like building a new life meant accepting the old one was gone. Exactly. Her eyes filled with tears. People don't understand. They think 4 months is enough time to move on or find closure or whatever other cliché they throw at grief. But I'm not ready. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. You don't have to be ready. You just have to show up. That's what I learned. I wasn't ready to rebuild my life when I started. I just kept showing up, to this dinner, to therapy, to uncomfortable conversations. And slowly, without noticing it happening, I started healing. We talked through dinner, and I learned that Catherine had been married for 35 years, that her husband's death had been sudden, that she felt completely lost without him. She'd come tonight only because her daughter had practically forced her, insisting that isolation would destroy her. "I'm glad you came," I said, "even if it feels wrong, even if it's hard. You're not betraying his memory by being here. You're honoring your own need to survive." When dinner ended, Catherine thanked me for talking with her, for understanding. "I think I might come back next week, if that's okay." "It's more than okay. We'll save you a seat." After she left, Rachel pulled me aside. "Did you see what just happened there?" "What?" "You responded to what God was showing you. You saw someone who was lonely and hurting, and you reached out. You shared your story in a way that helped her feel less alone." That's exactly what I meant about responding when opportunities present themselves. That night I wrote in my journal, day 22, met Catherine at dinner, recent widow, struggling with guilt about moving forward, shared my story. She's coming back next week. Rachel said I'm being prepared for something, starting to understand what she means. The following week brought more opportunities to respond. The woman at the coffee shop who sat alone every morning finally made eye contact when I smiled at her. We started talking. Her name was Julia, and she worked from home as a freelance writer, rarely interacting with anyone in person. She was lonely, but didn't know how to build community. "There's a dinner I go to on Fridays," I found myself saying. "Community meal, no charge, all are welcome. It's how I started building connections after years of isolation. You should come." She looked skeptical. "I don't know. I'm not good with groups." Neither was I, still not really. But this group is different. It's people who get what it's like to feel on the outside. People who won't judge you for being awkward or quiet or new. "Maybe. Can I think about it?" "Of course. No pressure, but if you decide to come, I'll meet you outside at 6 p.m. on Friday, so you don't have to walk in alone." The elderly man I'd noticed walking past my building every evening, I finally stopped him one day. His name was Arthur, and he'd been taking the same walk every evening for 2 years, ever since his wife moved into a nursing home with advanced dementia. "It's the only time I feel close to her," he said. "We used to walk this route together every evening for 40 years. Now I walk it alone, but I talk to her in my head, tell her about my day, ask her opinion on things. It's probably crazy." "It's not crazy. It's love." We walked together that evening, and several evenings after. I learned about his 60-year marriage, about watching his wife slowly disappear into dementia, about the grief of being with someone, but having them not really there. "Do you have people to talk to about all this?" I asked one evening. "Not really. Our kids are busy with their own lives. Friends from church mean well, but they don't know what to say. Most people just avoid the topic entirely. I go to a community dinner on Fridays. Lots of people dealing with grief and loss. You might find it helpful." "I don't know. I'm not much of a joiner." Neither was I. "But sometimes the thing we most need is the thing we're most resistant to." He thought about it. "Maybe I'll try it, once." By the time the 4th Friday in January rolled around, I'd invited 4 people to the community dinner: Julia the freelance writer, Arthur the widower walking his grief route, a young man named David I'd met at the coffee shop who'd just moved to Minneapolis and knew no one, and Margaret, the woman I'd met on Christmas morning at the nativity scene. I'd run into Margaret at the grocery store, and we talked for 20 minutes in the frozen food aisle. I'd told her about the community dinner, about the ways it had changed my life. I think you'd like it, I said, and I think other people would benefit from your wisdom. You have a gift for seeing what people need. You're sweet to say so. All right, I'll come. But only if you promise to introduce me to people. I hate walking into rooms full of strangers alone. That Friday evening, I stood outside the community center at 5:55 p.m., nervous. What if none of them showed up? What if they felt awkward and uncomfortable and never came back? What if I'd been presumptuous inviting them? But then Julia appeared, looking anxious. I almost didn't come. I've been sitting in my car for 10 minutes working up the courage. I'm glad you did. Come on, we'll go in together. Then Arthur, walking up with his characteristic slow gait. Well, I'm here. We'll see how this goes. David arrived on his bike, looking young and uncertain. Is this the right place? For the dinner? And finally Margaret getting out of an Uber with a pie in her hands. I can't go anywhere empty-handed. It's how I was raised. I walked in with all four of them, and Rachel's eyes went wide when she saw us. Thomas, you brought an entourage. I've been inviting people, like you said, responding when opportunities present themselves. She introduced herself to everyone, making them feel welcome, and soon they were absorbed into the larger group. I watched as Julia ended up in conversation with Lisa, the young mother with 2 kids, both of them discovering they worked in creative fields. Arthur sat with Joe and Dorothy, the 3 of them forming an instant connection over shared experiences of loss. David was talking with Miguel and Anna about adjusting to life in a new city. Margaret was holding court with a group of people, sharing stories and wisdom. Rachel pulled me aside during cleanup. Do you see what you did tonight? I just invited some people to dinner. No, you built bridges. You saw people who were isolated and you gave them a pathway to community. You did for them what was done for you. That's how this works, Thomas. We receive healing, and then we become part of the healing for others. It feels like such a small thing. All meaningful things start small. You invited 5 people to dinner. Those 5 people will connect with others who will connect with others. You just expanded our community significantly, and you did it by simply paying attention to lonely people and offering them something that had helped you. After the dinner, as we were walking out, Margaret caught up with me. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I needed this more than I realized. I've been going to church for years, but it's been lonely. All surface-level conversations, everyone performing happiness. This felt real. People being honest about struggling. That's what drew me here too. The honesty. Can I tell you something? Remember on Christmas when I told you about learning to notice who is present instead of who isn't? I've been practicing that, but tonight reminded me of something else. Sometimes we're called to be the presence someone else needs to notice. You were that for me tonight. You saw me, remembered me, invited me. That matters more than you know. Walking home that evening, I thought about what Margaret had said, about being the presence someone else needs to notice, about how God shows up through people who are willing to see and respond. Was this what I was being prepared for? Not some grand calling or ministry, but simply the daily practice of noticing lonely people and offering them connection, of using my own experience of loneliness and God's presence to help others find the same. That Sunday, during my call with my daughters, Sarah had news. I started therapy, Dad. Had my first session this week. How was it? Hard, but good. My therapist asked me to write about how the divorce affected me, and I've been realizing I've been carrying a lot of anger and sadness I didn't know how to deal with. I'm proud of you for doing that work, sweetheart. It's not easy. Did it get easier for you? Therapy? Some things got easier. Some things got harder before they got easier because I had to face stuff I'd been avoiding. But overall, yes, it's helping. I'm healing in ways I didn't know I needed to heal. Sophie spoke up. Mom's not happy about it, about Sarah doing therapy. She thinks it means Sarah's blaming her for everything. Your mother is defensive because she's probably carrying her own guilt about the divorce, I said carefully. But Sarah doing therapy isn't about blaming anyone. It's about processing her own feelings so she can move forward healthy. That's what I told her, Sarah said, but I don't think she gets it. She keeps saying we're fine, that we don't need therapy, that we should just move on. Some people aren't ready to face their own pain, so they resist when others do. That's okay. You focus on your own healing. Let your mom work through her stuff in her own time. After the call, I sat with the reality that my daughters were being affected by my journey toward healing. Sarah starting therapy, Sophie asking harder questions. Both of them having to navigate their mother's resistance to their growth. Was this part of what happens when we start healing? Do we inevitably affect the people around us, forcing them to face their own unexamined pain? I brought it to my next therapy session. Yes, Dr. Mitchell said simply. When we start healing, we disrupt the systems we're part of. Your daughters have been in a system where everyone pretends to be fine, where pain is ignored, where moving forward means pretending the past doesn't hurt. You're changing that system by being honest about your pain and your healing. That forces them to examine their own pain. And Linda's not happy about it. Of course not. Your healing and your daughter's healing highlights her lack of healing. That's uncomfortable for her. But Thomas, you can't control her response. You can only control your own journey and support your daughters in theirs. So I just keep doing the work. You keep doing the work. You keep being honest. You keep showing up. And you trust that your healing and your daughter's healing will eventually create the space for Linda to do her own healing if she chooses to. That night, I added to my journal. Day 29. Invited Julia, Arthur, David, Margaret to community dinner. All came, all connected with others. Rachel said I'm building bridges, becoming part of healing for others. Sarah started therapy. Linda resistant. Dr. Mitchell says my healing disrupts systems, forces others to face their pain, learning that healing is never just personal, it ripples outward. I looked back over the past month of entries, from complete isolation on Christmas Eve to building community and inviting others into it. From drowning in unprocessed grief to actively working through it in therapy. From estrangement from my daughters to rebuilding connection and supporting their healing. Not because I'd done everything right, not because I'd followed some perfect plan, but because I'd been willing to see where God was showing up and respond to it, because I'd been willing to receive help and then offer it to others, because I'd learned that healing wasn't just personal, it was communal, Emmanuel, God with us, not just with me, but with all of us. In the lonely woman at the coffee shop, in the widower walking his grief route, in the young man new to the city, in the daughters working through their own pain, in the community that formed when isolated people started showing up for each other. God with us, in the small moments of connection that added up to transformation. God with us, in the hard work of therapy and honest conversations. God with us, in the willingness to be vulnerable enough to receive help and brave enough to offer it. This was the Christmas miracle still unfolding a month later. Not a one-time event, but an ongoing invitation into a way of seeing and being and connecting that made loneliness impossible because God was everywhere, in everyone, in every small act of noticing and responding. And I was just beginning to understand what it meant to live in response to that presence, to be the hands that held someone who was sinking, to be the voice that said, "You're not alone." To be the presence that someone else needed to notice, not because I had it all figured out, not because I was fully healed, but because I'd been seen in my loneliness and brokenness, and now I could see others in theirs. And that seeing, that noticing, that responding, that was where God showed up most clearly of all. February arrived with the kind of cold that makes you question why anyone lives in Minneapolis. The kind of cold where your nostrils freeze when you breathe, where every car refuses to start without a fight, where going outside feels like a form of voluntary suffering. But I'd learned something about winter over the past 5 weeks. The coldest season could also be the season of greatest warmth if you knew where to look for it. I was 6 weeks into therapy now, meeting with Dr. Mitchell every Thursday evening. We'd moved past the surface-level processing of my divorce and were digging into deeper patterns. why I'd thrown myself so completely into work that I'd neglected my marriage, why I'd isolated myself after the divorce rather than seeking support, why I'd defined my worth by external achievements rather than inherent value. It was uncomfortable work, the kind of work that left me exhausted after each session, that made me question things I'd accepted as true about myself for decades. But it was also necessary work. "I think we need to talk about your father," Dr. Mitchell said during one session. I felt my whole body tense. "What about him? You've mentioned him several times in passing, always in the context of achievement. You've talked about trying to make him proud, about his expectations, about feeling like you failed him when your career fell apart. But you've never talked about your relationship with him. There's not much to talk about. He was a good father, provided for us, worked hard. But did he see you? Did he know you?" The question hit harder than I expected. "I don't know. I don't think I ever thought about it that way." "Tell me about the last conversation you had with him before he died." I sat with that for a long moment, trying to remember. My father had died 7 years ago, a year before my marriage fell apart. We talked about my work, about a big project I was leading. He asked about the details, about the budget, about the timeline. He was proud of what I'd accomplished. Did he ask about you? About your marriage, your life, your feelings? No, but that wasn't his way. He wasn't an emotional man. He showed love through providing, through supporting our achievements. And did you feel loved, seen, known? I felt tears prick my eyes unexpectedly. I felt accomplished, valuable, like I mattered because I was doing impressive things. But seen, known? I don't think so. I don't think he ever knew who I actually was beyond my accomplishments. And when your career fell apart, what happened to your sense of value? The connection snapped into place with painful clarity. It disappeared, because my value had always been tied to achievement. If I wasn't accomplishing impressive things, I wasn't valuable. I wasn't worthy of love or attention or connection. "That's a pattern we need to work on," Dr. Mitchell said gently. "Separating your inherent worth from your achievements. Learning that you have value simply because you exist, not because of what you accomplish or produce or build." The work of unpacking that pattern took weeks. I wrote about it in my journal, talked about it with Rachel at community dinners, even brought it up during a Sunday call with my daughters. "Did you know Grandpa?" I asked Sarah. "I mean, really know him?" "Not really. He was always nice to us, but kind of distant, like he didn't know what to do with kids. Why? I've been realizing in therapy that I learned from him to equate my value with my achievements. And when I lost my career, I felt like I'd lost my right to be loved or valued." "Dad, that's really sad. You know that's not true, right? That your value isn't about what you accomplish." "I'm learning it, slowly. But it's hard to unlearn something that's been wired into you for 40 years. Sophie spoke up. "Is that why you worked so much when we were kids? Because you thought your value was in providing and achieving?" Her question landed like a punch. Yeah, I think it was. And I'm sorry. I should have been more present with you both. Should have shown up for the small moments instead of always chasing the next big achievement. "It's okay, Dad. I mean, it wasn't okay then, but I understand now, and you're different now. You're actually here when we talk. You're present." After the call, I sat with the weight of what they'd said. My daughters could see the change in me, could feel the difference between the father who'd been chasing achievement and the father who was learning to simply be present. The community dinners continued to be an anchor point in my week. The group had grown. The people I'd invited were now inviting others. Julia brought a friend who was also working from home and feeling isolated. Arthur brought another widower from his building. Margaret brought people from her church who were struggling with loneliness. Rachel pulled me aside one evening. "Do you realize what's happening? This dinner started with about 15 regular people 6 months ago. We're now averaging 40 people every Friday. And most of that growth has happened in the last month, since you started inviting people. I'm just doing what was done for me, noticing lonely people and offering them connection. That's exactly how movements start. One person experiences something transformative and then helps others experience it too. You're not just attending anymore, Thomas. You're leading. I'm not a leader. I'm just a guy who knows what loneliness feels like and doesn't want other people to suffer through it alone. That's what the best leaders are, people who've been where others are going and can light the path. The idea of being a leader felt foreign and uncomfortable, but I couldn't deny that something was happening. People were seeking me out for conversation, asking me questions about how I'd moved from isolation to connection, wanting to hear my story. One Friday evening, a man in his 30s approached me after dinner. His name was Marcus, and he looked exhausted in a way I recognized, the exhaustion of someone carrying weight they weren't meant to carry alone. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. Of course. We sat in a corner while cleanup happened around us, and Marcus told me his story. He'd lost his job 6 months ago. His unemployment was running out. He was facing eviction from his apartment. He'd been too ashamed to tell anyone, too proud to ask for help, too convinced that asking for help meant failure. "I've been coming here for 3 weeks," he said. "At first just for the free meal, I'll be honest. But I've been watching you, watching how you talk to people, how you seem to actually care. And I keep thinking, if you can talk about going through hard things, maybe I can too. Maybe I don't have to pretend I'm okay when I'm drowning." "You don't," I said. "Pretending only makes the drowning worse. I spent 3 years pretending I was fine while I was dying inside, and it nearly destroyed me. So what did you do? How did you stop drowning?" "I stopped trying to do it alone. I started therapy. I came to these dinners. I got honest with people about struggling. I learned to let people help me. But how do you ask for help without feeling like a complete failure? You realize that asking for help isn't failure. It's wisdom. It's strength. It's the only way humans were meant to survive. We're not designed to carry everything alone." We talked for over an hour. I connected him with Joe, who'd been through homelessness and job loss and new resources. I gave him Rachel's number. She kept a list of churches and organizations that helped with rent assistance. I invited him to keep coming to dinners, to keep showing up, to stop pretending he was fine. "Thank you," he said, when we finally stood to leave. "I came here tonight thinking I was at the end, that I was out of options, but you just gave me hope that maybe I can get through this." You can, not alone, but with help and community and willingness to be honest about struggling. Yes, you can get through this. Walking home that night, I thought about what Rachel had said, about being a leader, about lighting the path for others. It still felt strange to think of myself that way, but I was starting to understand that leadership wasn't about having everything figured out or being perfect. It was about being a few steps ahead on the same path others were walking and being willing to turn around and say, "I've been where you are. Here's what helped me. You're not alone." Mid-February brought an unexpected phone call. It was Linda. "Thomas, I need to talk to you about Sarah." My stomach clenched. "Is she okay?" "She's fine, physically, but she's been in therapy for a few weeks now, and she's asking difficult questions about the divorce, about my role in it, about things I said about you to her and Sophie, and I've been defensive and angry, and it's causing tension between us." "Okay. I think I need to do what Sarah's doing, what you're doing. I think I need therapy, and I'm wondering if you could give me the name of your therapist." I was stunned. Linda asking for help, Linda admitting she needed therapy. This was not the woman I'd been married to. "Of course. I'll text you her information. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She's really good, Linda. She'll help you work through things you didn't know needed working through." "Thank you. And Thomas, I'm sorry for all of it, for how I handled the divorce, for turning the girls against you, for all the ways I made things harder than they needed to be. I've been carrying a lot of guilt about it, and Sarah doing therapy has forced me to face things I've been avoiding." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Linda apologizing, Linda going to therapy, Linda facing things she'd been avoiding. The ripple effect of healing was wider than I'd imagined. I brought it to my next therapy session, still processing what had happened. "That's significant," Dr. Mitchell said. "Your healing is creating space for your ex-wife's healing. That's not always how it works, but when it does, it's powerful. It means the whole family system can start to shift toward health instead of staying stuck in dysfunction. It feels surreal. A month ago, Linda was defensive and resistant. Now she's calling me asking for help. That's what happens when people can't ignore their own pain anymore. Sarah, starting therapy, held up a mirror that showed Linda her own unexamined wounds. And sometimes that's what it takes to break through denial, seeing someone we love doing the work we need to do. Do you think you'll take her as a client? I'll have an initial consultation with her and see if we're a good fit. But Thomas, you need to be careful about something. Don't let Linda's journey become your responsibility. You can support her decision to get help, but you can't manage her healing. That's hers to do. I know, but it's hard not to feel hopeful. Hopeful that maybe we can all heal from what happened, that maybe our daughters can have parents who've done their work instead of parents who are still stuck in resentment and blame. That's a healthy hope. Just make sure it stays hope and doesn't become expectation or responsibility. The last week of February brought a cold snap that broke records. Temperatures didn't get above 0 for 5 days straight. Everything froze, water pipes, car engines, even the tears that came when you stepped outside. But on Friday evening, 43 people showed up to community dinner. 43 people who braved dangerous cold because they'd found something here they couldn't find anywhere else. Genuine connection, honest community, a place where you could show up broken and be welcomed. During dinner, I looked around the room and saw the connections that had formed. Julia, the freelance writer, was now helping David create a website for his new business. Arthur and Margaret had started a book club for people dealing with grief. Catherine and Dorothy met for coffee every Wednesday to talk about widowhood. Joe was mentoring Marcus through the job search process. Community wasn't just happening, it was multiplying. Every connection creating new connections. Every person who'd been helped now helping others. Rachel stood to make an announcement. I want to share something with you all. When I started these dinners 5 years ago, I never imagined they'd grow into this beautiful, messy, genuine community of people who show up for each other. And I want to highlight someone who's been instrumental in our recent growth, Thomas. I felt my face flush as people turned to look at me. Thomas came to his first dinner 7 weeks ago. He was isolated, grieving, struggling, but instead of just receiving help, he started offering it. He started noticing lonely people and inviting them here. He started having conversations that helped others feel less alone. He started building bridges between people, and because of that, our community has almost doubled. So thank you, Thomas, for being willing to receive help and then offer it to others. People clapped, and I felt simultaneously honored and uncomfortable. I didn't want to be singled out. I'd just done what felt natural, seen lonely people and invited them to experience what had saved me. But afterward, several people came up to thank me, to tell me their stories of how they'd ended up here, how my invitation or my story or my willingness to listen had made a difference. I was planning to kill myself, one young woman said quietly. I had the pills ready, but then I came here because you invited me at the coffee shop, and people here gave me reasons to stay alive. So thank you, you saved my life. I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to someone saying you saved their life when all you did was invite them to dinner? I'm glad you're still here, I finally said, and I'm glad you found community. But you saved your own life by showing up, by being willing to receive help, by choosing to stay. That was your courage, not mine. Walking home that night, I felt the weight of what I'd been entrusted with. People's stories, people's pain, people's lives in some cases. It was both humbling and terrifying. I wrote in my journal, Day 43, Linda called, going to therapy. Our healing, creating space for her healing. Community dinner had 43 people. Rachel thanked me publicly. Woman said I saved her life. I just invited her to dinner. Learning that small acts of noticing and inviting can have massive impact. Feeling both honored and overwhelmed by what God is doing through willing to be present to others' pain. I looked back through 6 weeks of entries. From Christmas Eve, desperation to becoming someone others saw as a leader. From isolation to community. From receiving help to offering it. From feeling abandoned by God to seeing God everywhere, in everyone, in every small moment of connection. The transformation wasn't complete. I was still in therapy, working through decades of patterns, still had hard days where loneliness crept back in, still struggled with defining my worth by achievement rather than existence. But I was different. Fundamentally, deeply different. And that difference was rippling outward, affecting my daughters, my ex-wife, dozens of people at community dinners, strangers at coffee shops, the elderly man walking his grief route. Emmanuel, God with us. Not in the dramatic, miraculous way I would have expected, but in the quiet, persistent way of one person being present to another, of noticing and responding, of receiving help and offering it. Of being the hands that held someone who was sinking because you remembered what it felt like to sink. This was the Christmas miracle, now 6 weeks old and still unfolding. Not a rescue from loneliness, but an invitation into a way of being that made loneliness impossible because we were all carrying each other. And I was learning that this was what it meant to be human in the way God intended, not isolated and self-sufficient, but connected and interdependent. Not pretending to be strong alone, but being honest about weakness together. Not hiding our brokenness, but letting it become the bridge that connected us to others who were broken. The coldest month was teaching me the warmest truths, that we need each other, that God shows up through people, that healing is never just personal but always communal. And I was grateful to be learning these truths, even when they were hard, even when they cost me my pride. Even when they required vulnerability I'd spent 40 years avoiding, because on the other side of that vulnerability was something I'd been seeking my whole life without knowing it. Genuine connection, real community, the sense of being known and loved, not despite my brokenness, but because I'd been willing to be honest about it. This was what Christmas had been trying to teach me all along, that God didn't abandon me in my loneliness. God met me there and showed me I was never alone, and then invited me to help others discover the same truth. March arrived, with the first hints of spring, temperatures occasionally climbing above freezing, patches of brown earth appearing through the snow, the promise of something new emerging from the long winter. I'd been in therapy for 2 months now, attending community dinners for 9 weeks, rebuilding my relationship with my daughters for 2 months, journaling daily for nearly 10 weeks. And I was starting to realize something profound. Healing wasn't a destination you arrived at, but a direction you traveled in. A daily choice, a continual practice of choosing connection over isolation, honesty over pretense, vulnerability over self-protection. My Thursday therapy session started with Dr. Mitchell asking a question I wasn't expecting. Thomas, we've been doing really good work on your past, understanding your father's influence, processing your divorce, examining your patterns of isolation. But I want to shift our focus slightly. What do you want your future to look like? I don't know. I haven't thought much beyond just getting through each day. That's survival mode. And it made sense for a long time. But you're not just surviving anymore, you're building something. So let's be intentional about what you're building. If we fast forward 5 years, what does Thomas's life look like? I sat with the question. 5 years ago, I would have answered with external markers, career achievements, financial goals, status symbols. But those answers felt hollow now. I want to still be in community. Still connected to people, still having these Friday dinners where lonely people find connection. I want to have a real relationship with my daughters, not just obligatory phone calls. I want to have worked through enough of my stuff that I'm not just reacting to wounds anymore, but actually living from a healthy place. That's good. What else? I want to help people, not in a savior complex way, but in the way I've been helped. I want to be someone who notices when others are drowning and reaches out. I want my life to matter in small, daily ways rather than in big, impressive ways that no one actually needs. And what about intimate relationships, romance? I felt myself tense. I haven't even thought about that. The idea of dating feels impossible right now. I'm not saying you should date right now, but at some point, after you've done enough healing work, you might want companionship again, and it's worth thinking about what kind of relationship you'd want, what you'd do differently than in your marriage to Linda. I'd be present, actually present, not always working or distracted. I'd value the person for who they are, not for what they add to my life or how they make me look. I'd be honest about struggling, instead of pretending to have it all together. Those are all things you're learning now. That's what this work is about. Not just healing from the past, but preparing yourself to show up differently in the future. The conversation stayed with me all week. What did I want my future to look like? Who did I want to become? Not in terms of achievements or status, but in terms of character, in terms of how I showed up in the world. That Friday at community dinner, I found myself watching the interactions with new eyes, watching how Joe mentored Marcus through his job search with patience and wisdom, how Margaret offered quiet encouragement to people who were struggling, how Rachel created space for everyone to belong, regardless of their background or circumstances. These were people who'd turned their own pain into purpose, who'd let their wounds become wisdom, who'd chosen to use what had nearly destroyed them to help others survive similar struggles. Was that what I wanted? To become someone whose brokenness became a bridge for others. During cleanup, Arthur pulled me aside. "Can I talk to you about something?" "Of course." "My wife died yesterday. At the nursing home. The dementia had progressed to the point where she didn't know anyone, couldn't speak, couldn't eat. And honestly, I'm relieved, which makes me feel like a terrible person." "You're not a terrible person. You watched the woman you love disappear over years. Relief that her suffering is over doesn't mean you didn't love her. It means you're human." I don't know what to do now. For 2 years, my entire life has been oriented around visiting her, walking our route, keeping her alive in my memory. And now she's gone, actually gone, and I don't know who I am without that. You're Arthur, not defined by being a caregiver or a grieving husband, though those were real parts of your life. You're Arthur, and you get to discover what comes next. How did you do it after your divorce? How did you figure out who you were after losing the identity you'd built your life around? I'm still figuring it out, but I think the key is to stop trying to go back to who you were before and instead ask who you're becoming. You're not the Arthur who had a wife with dementia anymore. You're the Arthur who survived one of the hardest things a person can survive, and you get to decide what you do with that survival. We talked for another hour, and before he left, Arthur asked if I'd be willing to lead a grief support group. There are a lot of us here who've lost spouses or partners or family members, and you have a gift for helping people process hard things. Would you consider it? The request caught me off guard. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I'm just someone who's walked through some hard things. That's exactly why you're qualified. We don't need an expert. We need someone who gets it. I told him I'd think about it, pray about it, talk to Rachel about whether it made sense for the community center. When I mentioned it to Rachel, her response surprised me. "I think it's a great idea. We've needed something like that for a while. And Thomas, you're ready for this. You've been informally doing this work for weeks now, sitting with people in their pain, helping them process, connecting them with resources. Making it formal just means more people can benefit from it. But I have no training, no credentials. Neither did I when I started these dinners. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never planned to lead, but simply responded to a need they saw. You see lonely, grieving people, and you know how to sit with them in their pain. That's what they need. That Sunday, during my FaceTime call with my daughters, I told them about the grief support group idea. "That's amazing, Dad," Sarah said. "You should absolutely do it. I'm nervous about it, about getting it wrong or saying something that hurts instead of helps. Dad, you've been helping me process my own grief about the divorce, about losing the family we used to be, and you haven't gotten it wrong. You've just been honest and present. That's what people need." Sophie added, "Also, you'd be doing what you tell us to do. using your pain for something meaningful instead of just suffering through it. After the call, I sat with their encouragement. My daughters believed in me, believed I could help others because they'd experienced my help themselves. The following week, I met with Rachel and Arthur to plan the grief support group. We decided to meet every other Wednesday evening at the community center, open to anyone dealing with loss, death, divorce, job loss, any kind of significant grief. No credentials required to attend, just willingness to be honest about struggling. "What should we call it?" Rachel asked. I thought about my Christmas experience, about feeling abandoned and then discovering I wasn't alone. What about not alone? That's what people need to know when they're grieving, that they're not alone in it. "I love it," Arthur said. "Not Alone Grief Support Group. When should we start?" "Next Wednesday. We'll announce it at dinner this Friday and see who shows up." That Friday, Rachel made the announcement during dinner. "We're starting a new group for anyone dealing with grief. It'll be led by Thomas and Arthur, meeting every other Wednesday evening. If you're grieving a loss, any kind of loss, you're welcome to join us." Afterward, 7 people approached me saying they wanted to come. Catherine, the widow I'd met at my first dinner. Marcus, who was grieving the loss of his career and apartment. Julia, who'd lost her mother 6 months ago and hadn't processed it. A woman named Patricia, who'd lost her adult son to suicide. 2 others I hadn't met before. The first Not Alone meeting was the following Wednesday. 8 of us sat in a circle, me, Arthur, and the 6 people who'd signed up. I'd never felt more unqualified for anything in my life. "I'm not a therapist or a counselor," I started. "I'm just someone who's walked through grief and knows what it feels like to think you're drowning in it. Arthur and I are here not as experts but as fellow travelers. This is a space where you can be honest about how hard grief is, where you don't have to pretend you're doing better than you are, where we can carry each other's pain together." Patricia spoke first. "My son died by suicide 8 months ago. Everyone says I should be moving on or finding closure, but I'm not ready to move on. I don't want closure. I want my son back, and I can't have that. So I'm just stuck in this impossible grief that no one seems to understand." "I understand," Arthur said. "My wife just died after 2 years of dementia. Everyone says I should be relieved that her suffering is over, and part of me is. But mostly I'm just angry and sad and lost. And people don't want to hear that. They want me to focus on the good memories and be grateful for the time we had. But right now, I'm just furious that she's gone." One by one, people shared. Each story different in details, but similar in the core experience. Pain that felt unbearable, loss that left them fundamentally changed, grief that people around them didn't know how to handle. And as they shared, something happened. The weight of their individual grief became somehow lighter when shared collectively. Not gone, not fixed, but more bearable when carried together. I told them about my Christmas, about feeling completely abandoned, about crying out to God in desperation, about the presence I felt that said I wasn't alone, about learning to see God in small moments of connection. "That's what got me through," I said. "Not the grief getting smaller or going away, but learning I didn't have to carry it alone, that there were people and God willing to help carry it with me. That's what we're doing here, carrying each other's grief so no one has to carry it alone." When the meeting ended 2 hours later, several people stayed to talk. Patricia thanked me for creating the space. "I haven't been able to talk about my son honestly in months. Everyone changes the subject or tries to make me feel better. But you just let me be sad. That's what I needed." Walking home that night, I felt both drained and filled. Drained from holding space for so much pain. Filled with the sense that this was exactly what I was supposed to be doing. I wrote in my journal, Day 71 started Not Alone Grief Group. 8 people. So much pain in one room, but also so much courage. Patricia lost her son to suicide. Arthur's wife died. Marcus grieving his career and home. Others grieving parents, relationships, dreams. We didn't fix anyone's pain. We just made space for it. Learning that sometimes the greatest gift is not solving someone's problem, but being willing to sit with them in it. The next day, I got a call from Dr. Mitchell. "Thomas, I wanted to let you know that Linda came in for her first session this week, and with her permission, I'm letting you know she's going to be doing some intensive work. It's going to be hard, and it might affect her interactions with you and the girls for a while." "Okay, thanks for letting me know. How did she seem?" "Motivated, scared, ready to face things she's been avoiding. That's all I can say without violating confidentiality. I appreciate you telling me. I'll be patient with whatever process she needs to go through." After I hung up, I realized something significant. A few months ago, news that Linda was struggling would have felt threatening or created anxiety. But now I could hold it with compassion, could hope for her healing without needing it to look a certain way or happen on a certain timeline. That was growth, real growth, being able to care about someone's healing without trying to control it. The second Not Alone meeting 2 weeks later brought more people. Word had spread, and we had 12 attendees. The stories continued. Divorce, death, job loss, miscarriage, estrangement from children, loss of faith, chronic illness that stole the life they'd planned. So much pain, but also so much resilience, so much courage and the willingness to show up and be honest about suffering. One woman, Elena, shared about losing her teenage daughter to cancer 3 years ago. "People tell me I should be over it by now, that 3 years is long enough to grieve, but grief doesn't have a timeline. I'm still a mother whose child died. I'll carry that for the rest of my life." "You don't have to be over it," I said. "You have to learn to live with it, to integrate it into your life instead of being crushed by it. That's different than getting over it." "Thank you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for giving me permission to still be broken 3 years later." After that meeting, Arthur and I stayed to debrief. "This is hard work," he said, "holding space for all that pain, but also some of the most meaningful work I've ever done." "Yeah, it matters in a way my architecture career never did. Building buildings was about ego and achievement. This is about actually helping people survive." "Do you think you'll keep doing this? Long term?" "I don't know. But right now, this feels like exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Like all the pain I went through, the divorce, the isolation, the grief, it's being redeemed by helping others walk through their own pain. That's what you told me on Christmas, remember? That your wounds could become bridges to help others. You're living that now." That Sunday, during my call with my daughters, Sarah had news. "Dad, I told Mom I want to come visit you for spring break. Just me, if that's okay. Sophie has plans with her friends, but I want to come see you, see your life, meet the people you've been telling us about." "I'd love that. Are you sure your mother is okay with it?" "She is. She's actually the one who suggested it. She said you and I need time to rebuild our relationship away from all the tension here." After the call, I sat in stunned gratitude. Sarah coming to visit, Linda supporting it, the family system shifting toward health instead of staying stuck in dysfunction. The healing was rippling outward in ways I never could have predicted or controlled. The last week of March brought the kind of weather that makes you believe winter might actually end. Temperatures in the 50s, birds returning, green shoots pushing up through brown earth, everything suggesting resurrection, renewal, rebirth. I was 3 months out from Christmas, 90 days since I'd cried out to God in desperate loneliness and felt the presence that said I wasn't alone. 90 days of daily choices to show up, to be present, to notice, to connect, to heal, and my life was unrecognizable from what it had been. I had community, real, genuine community of people who knew my story and loved me anyway. I had daughters I was rebuilding relationship with. I had a grief support group where I was helping others survive what had nearly destroyed me. I had a weekly therapy practice where I was doing the deep work of healing decades-old wounds. I had purpose that didn't come from achievement but from being present to others' pain. I had value that didn't come from productivity but from simply being willing to show up honestly. I had connection that didn't come from performing but from being vulnerable about my brokenness. That Friday at community dinner, which now regularly drew over 50 people, Rachel asked if I'd be willing to share my story. "I think people need to hear how you got from Christmas Eve isolation to leading a grief support group, how transformation actually happens." So after dinner, I stood up and told them about the divorce and isolation, about Christmas Eve desperation, about the presence that said I wasn't alone, about learning to see God in small moments, about therapy and community dinners and rebuilding relationships with my daughters, about starting to help others because I'd been helped, about the grief support group and learning that healing happens in community. "I don't share this to make myself look good," I concluded. "I share it because I want you to know that transformation is possible, that no matter how alone you feel, you're not alone, that God shows up in the people who are willing to see you and sit with you and carry your pain with you, that healing isn't a solo journey but a communal one, that your pain doesn't have to be wasted, it can become the bridge that connects you to others who are suffering." When I finished, people were crying. And then they started sharing their own stories, stories of isolation and connection, stories of desperation and hope, stories of being seen when they thought they were invisible. The testimonies went on for over an hour, story after story of people whose lives had been changed by finding community, by being seen, by discovering they weren't alone. Rachel finally stood up. "This is what it's all about. This is why we do this. Because loneliness is killing people, and connection saves them, because God shows up through people who are willing to be present to each other, because we were never meant to do life alone." Walking home that night, I thought about how far I'd come, not in miles or achievements, but in willingness. Willingness to be vulnerable, willingness to receive help, willingness to offer it, willingness to let my wounds become wisdom and my pain become purpose. This was what Emmanuel meant, God with us, not God rescuing us from suffering, but God being present in the suffering with us, God showing up through people who were willing to notice and respond, God working through community to heal what isolation had broken. And I was learning that this was enough, more than enough. It was everything, not the life I'd planned, not the success I'd been chasing, but a life that mattered in small, daily ways, a life of presence and connection and genuine human encounter, a life that felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like actually living instead of just surviving. And it had all started with 7 words I'd heard on Christmas Eve. God hadn't abandoned me. I just needed new eyes to see where he'd been all along. April arrived with undeniable spring, trees budding, flowers pushing through soil, the world coming back to life after months of frozen dormancy. And I felt like I was coming back to life with it. Sarah was arriving in 2 days for spring break, a full week with my daughter, the longest we'd spent together in 3 years. I was both excited and terrified. What if the connection we'd built over FaceTime didn't translate in person? What if she was disappointed by my small apartment and simple life? What if I couldn't be the father she needed? I brought these fears to my Thursday therapy session. "Those are all understandable anxieties," Dr. Mitchell said. "But notice what they have in common. They're all about you not being enough, about you failing or disappointing her. That's the old pattern. Your value tied to performance, to being impressive, to not making mistakes. So, how do I show up differently? You show up as yourself, imperfect, still healing, still growing. You trust that Sarah isn't coming to evaluate your performance as a father. She's coming to reconnect with you, to see your life, to be in relationship with you. That doesn't require you to be perfect. It requires you to be present. But what if I mess it up? Then you'll mess it up and you'll repair it. That's what healthy relationships do. They make mistakes and then repair them. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real and willing to work through the hard moments. The conversation helped, but I was still nervous when I picked Sarah up at the airport on Saturday afternoon. She came through the arrivals gate looking older than I remembered, more like a young woman than a teenager. When she saw me, her face broke into a genuine smile, and suddenly she was running toward me. "Dad!" She hugged me tight, and I felt 3 years of distance beginning to close. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm so glad you're here." "Me too. I can't believe I'm actually here, in Minneapolis, seeing where you live." We drove to my apartment, and I watched her take it all in. The small studio, the simple furnishings, the journal on my table, the stack of books from the library, the photos of her and Sophie on my wall. "It's cozy," she said. "I like it. It feels like you." "It's not much compared to—" "Dad, stop! I'm not here to judge your apartment. I'm here to spend time with you." That first evening, we went to dinner at a small restaurant near my place. Nothing fancy, just good food and the chance to talk face to face instead of through a screen. "So tell me about therapy," she said. "What's it actually like?" "Hard, really hard, but also necessary. Dr. Mitchell has been helping me see patterns I couldn't see on my own. Ways I learned to equate my value with achievement. Ways I isolated myself instead of asking for help. Ways I've been carrying wounds from my father that I didn't even know were wounds. That's what my therapist is doing too, helping me see patterns, like how I've been trying to be perfect to make Mom happy, because I felt like the divorce was somehow my fault, and if I could just be good enough, everything would be okay. Oh, Sarah, the divorce wasn't your fault at all. That was between your mother and me. Our failure as partners, not anything you did or didn't do. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, I've been carrying it. And therapy is helping me set it down." We talked for hours, and I was struck by how mature she'd become, how insightful, how willing to be vulnerable about her own struggles. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we were finishing dessert. "Do you think you and Mom will ever be able to be in the same room without it being awkward?" "I hope so. I think if we both keep doing our therapy work, we'll get there. Not friends, necessarily, but able to coexist peacefully for your sake and Sophie's." "I'd like that. It's exhausting managing the tension between you two, always having to be careful about what I say, worried about making one of you upset if I mention the other. I'm sorry you've had to do that. That's not fair to you. You should be able to love both of us without having to manage our relationship with each other." That's what my therapist says too. The next day, Sunday, was community dinner night. I'd moved my regular Friday attendance to Sunday for the week so Sarah could experience it with me. "Are you nervous?" I asked as we walked to the community center. "A little. I don't know anyone. What if they think I'm weird?" "They won't. And even if you feel awkward at first, that's okay. I felt awkward my first time too. But these people, they're some of the kindest, most genuine people you'll ever meet. They've all been through hard things, and they know what it's like to feel on the outside." When we arrived, Rachel greeted us warmly. "You must be Sarah. Thomas has told us so much about you. Welcome." Within minutes, Sarah was absorbed into conversations. Margaret was asking her about school. Julia was talking to her about writing. Sarah had mentioned she liked creative writing. Catherine was sharing stories about her own daughter, who was around Sarah's age. I watched my daughter connect with my community, and something in my chest loosened. These two parts of my life, my relationship with Sarah and my relationship with this community, were meeting, and they fit together naturally. During dinner, Sarah sat next to Arthur, and I heard them talking about his wife's recent death. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sarah said with genuine empathy. "Thank you, dear. It's been hard. But I'm learning that grief is something you carry, not something you get over. My dad says that too, about the divorce, that he's learning to carry it rather than trying to get over it. Your father is a wise man. He's helped me more in the past few months than I can express." After dinner, as we walked home, Sarah was quiet, processing. "Those people really love you," she finally said. "I love them too. They saved me in a lot of ways. Gave me community when I was drowning in isolation. I can see why. They're special, really special. And Dad, watching you with them, you're different than you used to be, more present, more real, more like, I don't know, more like yourself. That's the best compliment you could give me." Monday, I took Sarah to meet Dr. Mitchell. I'd asked Sarah if she wanted to do a joint session, and she'd agreed. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah," Dr. Mitchell said. "Thomas has told me a lot about you, about how proud he is of you, about the work you're doing in your own therapy." We spent the hour talking about our relationship, what had been broken, what was being rebuilt, what we both wanted it to look like going forward. It was vulnerable and uncomfortable and necessary. "I was so angry at you," Sarah said at one point, crying, "for leaving us, for moving so far away, for not fighting harder to stay connected. I felt abandoned." "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to fight for you without making things harder. I didn't know how to stay connected when your mother was actively working to create distance. And I should have tried harder, should have been braver, should have put you and Sophie first instead of just accepting the situation. But you're trying now, you're showing up now, and that matters." By the end of the session, we'd both cried, both apologized, both committed to continuing to rebuild even when it was hard. "You two are doing beautiful work," Dr. Mitchell said as we were leaving. "Relationships heal when people are willing to be honest about the pain and work through it together. That's what you're doing." That evening, Wednesday, was the Not Alone grief group. I'd asked Sarah if she wanted to come to see this part of my life, and she'd said yes. 15 people showed up that night. The group had grown again. People shared about losses both recent and years old. Patricia talked about her son's suicide. Elena talked about her daughter's death from cancer. Marcus talked about grieving the life he'd thought he'd have before job loss and near homelessness. And Sarah shared too, about grieving the family she used to have, about the loss of daily connection with her father, about the pain of watching her parents destroy each other during the divorce. "I didn't think divorce counted as grief," she said. "I thought grief was only when someone dies. But my therapist helped me see that I've been grieving the death of my family, the death of the life I thought I'd have, and that grief is real and valid." After the meeting, several people came up to thank her for sharing. Patricia gave her a hug. "You're brave, sweetheart. It takes courage to name your grief, especially at your age." Walking home, Sarah was quiet again. "That was intense," she finally said. "Yeah, it usually is. People holding that much pain together. It's heavy, but also somehow healing. I can see why you do it, why it matters to you. Those people, they really needed to tell their stories, and you and Arthur gave them space to do that. That's all we do, really. Create space for people to be honest about suffering. We don't fix anything. We just make room for the pain. That's more than most people do. Most people run from pain, try to make it stop or make it smaller or make it go away. You just sit with people in it. That's rare, Dad. Thursday, we went to the coffee shop where I'd spent so many mornings. Keisha greeted us warmly. "You must be Sarah. Your dad talks about you all the time." We sat in my usual corner, and I watched Sarah take in this space that had become sacred to me. "This is where I started noticing people," I told her. "Where I met Julia, where I had the conversation with the barista that made me realize I was ready to start rebuilding, where I've written most of my journal entries." "Can I read some of them? Your journal entries?" I hesitated, then pulled out my journal from my bag. "Sure. You can read the ones from Christmas forward if you want." She spent the next hour reading while I worked on some emails. Occasionally she'd look up with tears in her eyes or a small smile. When she finished, she handed the journal back carefully. "Dad, this is beautiful and heartbreaking and hopeful. I had no idea Christmas was that hard for you, that you felt that abandoned. I was in a dark place, darker than I'd admitted to anyone, including myself. But you got through it. You found God in the small moments. You found community. You found your way back to me and Sophie. That's amazing. I didn't do it alone. That's what I learned. I spent 3 years trying to survive alone, and it nearly killed me. But when I finally let people help, when I finally asked for help, everything started to change." Friday, Sarah's last full day, we spent quietly. We walked around the city, visited a museum, had lunch at a place Margaret had recommended, just being together without agenda or pressure. That evening, we made dinner in my tiny apartment, pasta and salad. Nothing fancy, but made together. "I don't want to leave tomorrow," Sarah said as we ate. "I like it here. I like your life. I like the person you are here. You can visit any time. And I'm planning to come see you and Sophie this summer, if your mother is okay with it." "She will be. She's different lately, softer, less defensive. I think therapy is helping her too. I'm glad. I want her to heal, not for me, but for her own sake, and for you and Sophie. Can I tell you something? I used to be so angry at you, like furious. I blamed you for everything that went wrong. But being here this week, seeing your life, understanding what you've been through, I don't blame you anymore. I understand now that the divorce was complicated, that both you and Mom made mistakes, that no one was the villain. Thank you for saying that. And Sarah, I'm sorry I wasn't the father you needed when you were younger. I was so focused on work, on achieving, on providing materially that I didn't provide what actually mattered, presence. You're providing it now. That's what matters." Saturday morning, I drove Sarah to the airport. We hugged for a long time before she went through security. "I love you, Dad. Thank you for this week, for letting me into your life, for being real with me." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you know. Thank you for being brave enough to come here, for being willing to rebuild with me." I watched her walk through security, turning back to wave one more time before she disappeared around the corner, and I felt both the ache of her leaving and the fullness of what we'd rebuilt. Driving home, I thought about the week, about Sarah meeting my community, about the joint therapy session, about her sharing at the grief group, about quiet evenings cooking dinner together, about her reading my journal and understanding my journey. A week ago, I'd been terrified our connection wouldn't translate in person, but it had. More than translated, it had deepened, solidified, become something real and lasting. That evening, alone in my apartment again, I wrote in my journal, Day 105, Sarah's visit. Best week I've had in years. She met my community. They loved her. Joint therapy session. We both cried, both apologized, both committed to continuing to rebuild. She came to grief group and shared about grieving our family. She read my journal and understood. We cooked dinner together. Just were together. She said she doesn't blame me anymore, that she understands now. I'm not just rebuilding a relationship with my daughter. I'm building a new one, based on honesty and presence instead of performance and distance. God is redeeming everything. Every moment of pain, every year of isolation, every mistake I made. It's all being woven into something new, not erasing the past, but transforming it. Sunday's FaceTime call included both daughters, and Sophie was full of questions about Sarah's visit. Was Dad's apartment really small? Did you meet all his weird friends? Did he cry a lot? Sarah laughed. His apartment is cozy. His friends aren't weird at all. They're amazing. And yes, we both cried. A lot. But good crying. Healing crying. "I want to come visit too," Sophie said. "Maybe this summer." "I'd love that," I said. "Both of you together if you want. We could explore the city, go to community dinners, just spend time together." After the call, I sat with the reality of what was happening. My relationship with my daughters wasn't just being restored, it was being rebuilt on a better foundation, based on honesty about struggle rather than pretense of having it together, based on presence rather than performance, based on vulnerability rather than invulnerability. Monday, back to my regular routine, I met with Rachel to debrief about Sarah's visit. She loved you all, I told her, and she said watching me with the community, she could see I was different, more present, more real, more myself. That's because you are different. You've done significant healing work in 4 months. You've gone from isolated and drowning to connected and helping others. That's not a small transformation. It doesn't feel like enough, though. There's still so much to work on, so many patterns to change, so much healing left to do. That's always going to be true. Healing is a lifelong process, not a destination. But Thomas, look at where you were Christmas Eve compared to where you are now. Look at what you've built. Look at the lives you've touched. You're not the same person. That week's therapy session was reflective. Dr. Mitchell had me look back over the past 4 months and identify specific changes. I'm in community instead of isolated, I said. I'm helping others instead of just surviving myself. I'm rebuilding relationships instead of accepting brokenness as permanent. I'm doing the work of healing instead of avoiding pain. I'm learning to define my worth by who I am rather than what I achieve. Those are massive shifts. And Thomas, I think we're approaching a transition point in your therapy. You've done the foundational work of understanding your patterns and processing your grief. The next phase is about consolidating these changes and learning to live from your new patterns rather than falling back into old ones. What does that look like practically? It means we might start meeting less frequently, maybe every other week instead of weekly. It means you taking more ownership of your continued growth. It means trusting that the work we've done has given you tools to navigate challenges that come up. The idea of less frequent therapy felt both exciting and scary, but I recognized it was part of growing, learning to stand on my own while still having support available when needed. That Friday at community dinner, Arthur pulled me aside. I wanted to tell you something. This grief group, helping lead it, sitting with others in their pain, it's given me purpose I didn't think I'd have again. After my wife died, I thought my life was essentially over, but I'm discovering there's a whole second chapter I get to write, and you helped me see that. You helped me see it too. We're helping each other. That's how it works, isn't it? We all carry each other. No one's got it all figured out. We're all just stumbling forward together, helping each other not stumble quite so badly. That's exactly how it works. Walking home that night, I thought about Arthur's words. About how we're all just stumbling forward together, helping each other not stumble quite so badly. That felt true, honest, real. None of us had it all figured out. We were all still healing, still growing, still learning, but we were doing it together, and that made all the difference. 4 months ago, I'd been completely alone. Now I was surrounded by people who knew my story and loved me anyway. People I was helping and people who were helping me. A community of mutual support and genuine connection. This was what Emmanuel meant. God with us. Not God fixing everything or taking away all pain, but God being present in the community that forms when broken people are willing to be honest with each other. God showing up in the willingness to see each other's pain and respond with compassion rather than judgment. And I was learning that this was enough. More than enough. It was everything I'd been searching for without knowing it. Belonging, connection, purpose, meaning. Not in impressive achievements or external success, but in daily presence to others' humanity. This was the life God had been inviting me into on Christmas Eve when I felt most abandoned. Not a life without struggle, but a life of struggling together. Not a life without pain, but a life of shared pain that somehow became more bearable in community. And I was grateful, deeply, profoundly grateful, for every moment of loneliness that had led me here. Because without the breaking, I never would have learned how to heal. Without the isolation, I never would have learned the value of community. Without the pain, I never would have learned how to sit with others in theirs. God hadn't abandoned me. He'd been preparing me for something I couldn't have imagined, a life of meaning found in the small moments of genuine human connection. And that life was just beginning. June arrived like a promise kept. The Minnesota winter I'd thought might kill me had transformed into a summer so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. Green everywhere, flowers blooming, people emerging from their homes like bears from hibernation, squinting at the sun they hadn't seen properly in months. 6 months had passed since Christmas Eve. 180 days since I'd cried out to God in desperate loneliness and heard, felt, the presence that said I wasn't alone. Half a year of daily choices to show up, to be present, to notice, to connect, to heal. And my life was completely unrecognizable from what it had been. I was sitting on a bench in the park near my apartment, journaling in the early morning quiet, when Margaret found me. "I thought that was you," she said. "Mind if I join you?" "Please do." She sat down with a contented sigh. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Hard to believe that 6 months ago we were both standing in front of that nativity scene, two strangers brought together by loneliness and a plastic baby Jesus. That was the day everything started changing for me. That conversation with you, it opened something, made me believe that maybe God really was present in small moments, in unexpected conversations. And look at what came from it. You started community dinners, started a grief group, rebuilt your relationship with your daughters, helped dozens of people find connection, all because you were willing to see where God was showing up and respond to it. You helped me see that. On Christmas morning, you taught me to notice who is present instead of who isn't, and you took that lesson and ran with it. Thomas, do you realize how many lives you've touched in 6 months? How many people are connected now because you were willing to notice them when they were invisible? I thought about it. The community dinners that now average 60 people every week. The grief group that had grown to over 20 regular attendees. The individuals I'd invited into community who were now inviting others. Julia had started a writing group. David had created a newcomers welcome committee. Arthur was mentoring other widowers. Catherine was leading a support group for people whose spouses had chronic illnesses. The ripples kept spreading outward in ways I couldn't track or control. I was just doing what was done for me, I said. I received help, so I offered it to others. That's exactly how transformation happens. That's exactly how God works through us. We receive grace, and then we extend it. We're healed, and then we become part of the healing for others. That afternoon, I had a session with Dr. Mitchell. We'd moved to bi-weekly meetings a month ago, and the transition had been smoother than I'd expected. "So, where are you?" she asked as we settled in. 6 months out from Christmas. What does Thomas look like now? Different, fundamentally different. I have community, real, genuine community where people know my story and love me anyway. I have a relationship with my daughters that's based on honesty rather than performance. I have purpose that comes from helping others rather than achieving things. I have value that isn't tied to productivity or success. Those are massive shifts. What's still hard? Some days I fall back into old patterns, thinking my worth comes from achievement, isolating instead of reaching out, trying to control things I can't control. But I catch myself faster now, and I have people who call me out when I'm slipping. That's significant. The goal was never to eliminate your patterns completely, but to develop awareness and tools to work with them. It sounds like that's happening. It is. And I'm learning that healing isn't linear. I have good days and setbacks, but the setbacks don't destroy me anymore. They're just information about what I still need to work on. How's your relationship with God? I thought about that question. It's different than it used to be. I don't see God as distant or absent anymore. I see God in people, in Margaret and Rachel and Arthur and my daughters, in the firefighters who fed me on Christmas Day, in the stranger who left free cocoa on their porch, in the community that forms when people are willing to be honest about struggling. God's not up in heaven somewhere unreachable. God's right here in the messiness of real human connection. That's beautiful and theologically sound, by the way. The incarnation, God becoming human in Jesus, suggests that God is most fully revealed in human connection, in presence, in the willingness to enter into suffering rather than stand apart from it. That's what Christmas was trying to teach me. Not that God would rescue me from loneliness, but that God was already present in it, waiting for me to have eyes to see. That evening was a special community dinner. Rachel had arranged for it to be outside in the park, a summer celebration of everything the community had become. Over 70 people showed up, the largest gathering yet. As I looked around at all the faces, I could trace the connections. There was Joe, who'd been homeless and was now in his own apartment and mentoring Marcus, who'd been facing eviction and was now working again and starting to rebuild his life. There was Julia, the isolated freelance writer, now leading a writing group and engaged to David, the young man who'd moved to the city knowing no one. There was Catherine, whose husband had died, now helping others navigate fresh widowhood. with the wisdom born from her own grief. And there were new faces too, people I didn't know, who'd been invited by people I'd invited, who were now inviting others. The community expanding in ways I couldn't have orchestrated if I'd tried. During dinner, Rachel asked if I'd share an update about my journey. I hadn't planned to speak, but I stood up, looking at all these people who'd become family. 6 months ago tonight, I began. I was alone in my apartment on Christmas Eve, convinced I'd been abandoned by everyone, including God. I was drowning in loneliness and grief and the weight of 3 years of unprocessed pain. And I cried out, desperately, hopelessly, asking God if he was real, if he was there, if he cared at all about my suffering. The crowd was silent, fully present, and I felt something I couldn't explain. A presence, a knowing, a sense of being seen and known and held. And I heard, not with my ears but with something deeper, God saying I wasn't alone, that I'd never been alone, that he was with me, had always been with me, and that I was about to discover what that really meant. I told them about Christmas Day, about Margaret at the nativity scene, about the firefighters, about learning to see God in small moments, about the community dinners and therapy, and rebuilding relationships with my daughters, about the grief group and helping others because I'd been helped. I'm not telling you this story to make myself look good, I said. I'm telling it because I want you to know that transformation is possible, that no matter how alone you feel, you're not alone, that God shows up in the people who are willing to see you and sit with you and carry your pain with you, that healing happens in community, not isolation, that your pain doesn't have to be wasted. It can become the bridge that connects you to others who are suffering. I paused, feeling the weight of what I wanted to say next. And I want to thank you, every single one of you, because you're the hands that held me when I was sinking. You're the presence that reminded me God was real. You're the community that saved my life. Not through some grand intervention, but through small, daily acts of kindness and presence and willingness to let me be broken in front of you. So thank you for showing up, for being real, for letting me be part of this beautiful, messy, genuine family we've built together. When I sat down, people were crying. And then, one by one, others stood up to share their own stories. Stories of isolation and connection. Stories of desperation and hope. Stories of finding community when they thought they'd be alone forever. Marcus stood up. I was going to kill myself 6 months ago. I'd lost everything. Job, apartment, dignity. I'd given up. But Thomas invited me to dinner, and for the first time in months, someone saw me. Really saw me. And that seeing saved my life. Now I'm working again, I have a place to live, and I'm helping others the way I was helped. This community doesn't just feed people, it gives them reasons to keep living. Patricia, who'd lost her son to suicide, stood next. I've been coming to the grief group for 3 months, and for the first time since my son died, I don't feel alone in my pain. I don't feel judged for still grieving 8 months later. I don't feel pressured to move on or find closure. I'm just allowed to be broken, and that permission to be broken is what's allowing me to slowly heal. Story after story, person after person, each one testifying to the power of community, of being seen, of knowing you're not alone in your suffering. Rachel finally stood up, tears streaming down her face. This is what I dreamed of when I started these dinners 5 years ago, not the numbers. I never cared about the numbers, but this genuine community where people can be real with each other, where pain is shared rather than hidden, where we all carry each other instead of trying to be strong alone. Thank you all for showing up, for being brave enough to be honest, for building something beautiful together. The celebration continued late into the evening. As the sun set and the park lights came on, people lingered, not wanting to leave, not wanting this moment of connection to end. Walking home that night, I thought about where I'd been and where I was. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined being part of something like this. Couldn't have imagined helping lead a community that mattered to so many people. Couldn't have imagined my life having meaning that came from presence rather than achievement, but here I was, changed, transformed, becoming someone I hadn't known I could be. The following Sunday was Father's Day. Both Sarah and Sophie video called me together, which was rare. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," they said in unison. "Thank you, sweethearts. This is the best Father's Day I've had in years." "We have news," Sarah said, exchanging a glance with Sophie. "Mum said we can both come visit for 2 weeks this summer, together, if you still want us." "If I want you? Of course I want you. That's amazing. When?" "End of July. We'll stay with you if that's okay. We know your apartment is small, but it's perfect. We'll make it work. I'm so excited to have you both here." After the call, I sat with the gratitude of it. Both my daughters, 2 weeks, a chance to show them my life, introduce them to my community, let them see the person I was becoming. Later that week, I got a call from Linda. We'd been talking more regularly, not long conversations, but brief check-ins that were cordial rather than tense. "Thomas, I wanted to tell you something. I've been in therapy for 3 months now, and I'm realizing how much damage I did, to you, to the girls, to myself, and I wanted to apologize, really apologize." "Linda, you already—" "No, let me finish. I made you the villain in our divorce because it was easier than facing my own role in our marriage failing. I turned the girls against you because I was angry and hurt, and wanted you to hurt too, and that was cruel. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Thank you for saying that, and Linda, I'm sorry too, for working so much that I was never really present, for defining my worth by career instead of family, for all the ways I failed as a husband. We both made mistakes. We did. But we're both doing the work to heal now, and that matters. The girls see it. They see us both changing, both growing. That's giving them permission to heal too. I'm glad. They deserve parents who've done their work. They do. And Thomas, thank you for not giving up on your relationship with them. I made it really hard, and you could have walked away, but you didn't. You kept showing up. That matters. After we hung up, I cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense that broken things could be repaired, that people could change, that families could heal, even when the damage seemed irreversible. The last week of June, I had what would be my final regular therapy session with Dr. Mitchell. We'd agreed that after 6 months of intensive work, I was ready to graduate to maintenance mode, sessions only as needed rather than scheduled regularly. "So, how does it feel?" she asked. "Finishing this chapter of therapy? Bittersweet. This work saved my life. You saved my life. But I also recognize I'm ready. I have tools now. I have community. I have awareness. I know how to ask for help when I need it." "You've done remarkable work, Thomas. 6 months ago you were isolated, grieving, convinced your life was essentially over. Now you're leading a grief group, part of a thriving community, rebuilding relationships with your daughters, helping dozens of people find connection. That's not a small transformation. It doesn't feel like I did it, though. It feels like it happened to me, like God orchestrated all of it. God may have orchestrated the opportunities, but you chose to respond to them. You chose to go outside on Christmas morning instead of staying isolated. You chose to attend that first community dinner instead of staying home. You chose to start inviting others instead of just receiving help yourself. You chose to do the hard work of therapy instead of avoiding pain. Those were all your choices, Thomas. Give yourself credit for that. I'm learning to. Learning that healing requires both God's presence and my active participation. That's exactly right. It's not either or, it's both and. God provides the grace, we provide the willingness. God creates the opportunities, we choose to respond to them. That's how transformation works. As I was leaving, Dr. Mitchell said one more thing. "Thomas, I want you to know something. In my 20 years of practice, I've worked with hundreds of clients, and very few of them have done the depth of work you've done in 6 months. Very few have been as honest, as willing to face hard things, as committed to real change. You should be proud of yourself. I'm certainly proud of you." Walking out of her office for the last time as a regular client, I felt both sadness and freedom. sadness at ending this relationship that had been so instrumental in my healing, freedom in knowing I was ready to walk forward on my own with the tools and awareness I'd developed. That Friday's community dinner included an announcement from Rachel. I have some news to share. The community center has given us approval to expand our programming. We're going to add more groups, one for parents going through divorce, one for people dealing with chronic illness, one for caregivers, one for young adults struggling with isolation. And we're going to need leaders for these groups, people who've been through hard things and are willing to help others walk through similar struggles. After the announcement, several people approached me asking if I'd consider leading or co-leading one of the new groups. The requests were humbling and overwhelming. I don't know if I'm ready for more, I told Rachel later. I'm already leading the grief group. I don't want to overcommit. Then don't. But Thomas, here's what I want you to consider. This community exists because you were willing to notice lonely people and invite them in. These new groups exist because of the need you helped us see. You don't have to lead them all, but your wisdom, your story, your gift for sitting with people in pain, it's needed. Pray about it, think about it, and let me know what feels right. That weekend, I journaled about the decision, about what I was being called to, about how to steward the transformation I'd experienced without burning out or falling back into achievement-based worth. And as I prayed, I felt a clear sense. You're ready. Not for everything, but for more. Trust that I'll give you what you need for whatever you say yes to. So I agreed to co-lead a group for people going through divorce, something I had intimate knowledge of and could help others navigate, not trying to fix or rescue, but simply offering my presence and my story. The end of June brought a heat wave, temperatures in the 90s, everyone seeking shade and air conditioning, and in the heat, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. I pulled out my journal and read through the entries from Christmas forward. The evolution was striking, from desperate isolation to thriving community, from unprocessed grief to active healing work, from estrangement from my daughters to rebuilt relationships, from feeling abandoned by God to seeing God everywhere. I wrote a new entry, Day 180, 6 months since Christmas Eve. Half a year since I cried out to God in desperation and felt the presence that said I wasn't alone. What's changed? Everything. I have community, 60+ people who show up every Friday to share meals and lives. I lead a grief group with Arthur that's helped 20+ people process their losses. I'm co-leading a new group for people going through divorce. My daughters are visiting for 2 weeks in July, both of them together. Linda and I are healing our co-parenting relationship. I've graduated from regular therapy to as-needed support. But more than the external changes, I'm different internally. I don't define my worth by achievement anymore. I don't believe love has to be earned through performance. I don't think asking for help means failure. I don't think suffering alone is noble or strong. I've learned that God doesn't abandon us in our loneliness. God meets us there and shows us we were never alone. That healing happens in community, not isolation. That our pain can become the bridge that connects us to others. That transformation happens in small daily choices to show up, be present, notice, connect. I've learned what Emmanuel really means, God with us, not God fixing everything or taking away all pain, but God being present in the community that forms when broken people are honest with each other. God showing up through people who are willing to see each other's suffering and respond with compassion. 6 months ago, I thought my life was essentially over, that I'd failed at everything that mattered, that I'd die alone and forgotten. But God had other plans to use my loneliness to teach me about connection, plans to use my pain to help me understand others' pain, plans to transform my isolation into community and my grief into purpose. I'm not the same person. I'm becoming someone I didn't know I could be, someone who leads not from perfection, but from honesty about imperfection. Someone who helps not from having it all figured out, but from remembering what it's like to not have it figured out. Someone who loves not from neediness, but from the security of knowing I'm loved. This is what that Christmas miracle was about. Not a one-time rescue from loneliness, but an ongoing invitation into a way of being that makes loneliness impossible because we're all carrying each other. God didn't abandon me. God was with me the whole time, waiting for me to have eyes to see. And once I saw, everything changed. Not because my circumstances changed dramatically, but because I changed, and that internal change created external transformation I couldn't have orchestrated or controlled. 6 months, 180 days. From Christmas Eve, desperation to summer abundance. From alone to surrounded by community. From drowning to helping others swim. From believing God had forgotten me to seeing God everywhere I look. This is my testimony. God is real. God is present. God is with us in the suffering, not just after it. And God transforms willing hearts that are humble enough to admit they need help. Thank you, God, for not abandoning me, for being Emmanuel even when I couldn't feel your presence, for using my pain to teach me things I couldn't have learned any other way, for the community that saved my life, for the daughters who've forgiven me, for the second chance at living that I thought was impossible. I'm not done healing. I'm not done growing. I'm not done learning, but I'm not alone in it anymore. And that makes all the difference. I closed the journal and looked out my window at the city I'd once felt so isolated in. Now it felt like home, not because the city had changed, but because I'd found my people here, had built a life that mattered here, had discovered purpose here. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. 30 days until we see you. Sophie and I are so excited. She says she can't wait to meet all your weird friends. I told her they're not weird, they're wonderful. Love you, Dad. I smiled, typing back, love you too, sweetheart. Can't wait to have you both here. Your weird dad and his wonderful friends are ready for you. That evening, I walked to the nativity scene where I'd met Margaret 6 months ago. The church had taken it down after Christmas, but I knew where it had stood. I stood in that spot, remembering Christmas morning, how desperate I'd been, how lost, how convinced I was drowning, and I whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you for meeting me here, for speaking to me through Margaret, for showing me I wasn't alone, for everything that's happened since, for using my brokenness to help others, for redeeming every moment of pain, for being Emmanuel, God with us, in ways I never expected but desperately needed. In the quiet of that summer evening, I felt it again. That presence, that knowing, that sense of being seen and loved and held. And I heard, not with my ears, but with that deeper place, God speaking again, this is just the beginning. There's so much more ahead. More healing, more growth, more opportunities to help others find what you found. Keep showing up. Keep being present. Keep noticing. Keep responding. I'm with you. I've always been with you, and I always will be. I stood there for a long time, letting those words sink in. This was just the beginning, not the end of my healing journey, but a milestone on a path that would continue for the rest of my life. But I wasn't walking it alone. I had God's presence. I had community. I had my daughters. I had purpose. I had everything I'd been searching for without knowing it. Belonging, connection, meaning, love. This was what Christmas had been trying to teach me all along. That God doesn't abandon us in our darkest moments. God meets us there, holds us there, and then invites us into transformation we can't imagine. And 6 months later, I was living proof that the invitation was real, that transformation was possible, that God's presence made all the difference. As I walked home through the warm summer evening, I felt profound peace. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because I'd arrived at some final destination. I hadn't. But because I'd learned the secret that changed everything. I was never alone. I would never be alone. God was with me, with us, with all of us who were willing to see where love showed up and respond to it. Emmanuel, God with us, God